Welcome back, you lovely people. My name is James Johnson. We're going to be talking about Season 7, Episode 4 of Game of Thrones. Wow, what an episode. As usual, we have the lovely Alizey here.
Hello.
We have Charlie in Westeros, my mother LaDonna, and Niko, the Universal Niko. TeeBaby can't join us tonight. Tony, I'm not sure if he's going to be joining us. He hasn't gotten back quite yet. And Maester Payne is having some computer issues, but should be joining us shortly. So, as usual, we'll do our introductions. Give me some glass candles rating of this episode, 0 to 10. And I've got a question for everybody that we'll get to in just a second, but we'll start with that. In my opinion, this episode was 9.5, maybe. There was just, they're hitting so many notes one after the other, and it's hard between the Arya and Brienne and the reunion stuff and the chaos stuff and this battle at the end. It's hard not to give this a superb rating. But we got a lot to talk about, so we'll start off with Alizey.
Well, I will give this episode a solid 9 because I don't give out 10s until the end of the season when I can kind of judge everything by the other episodes around it. But this episode, it was short. It felt like it was too short, but every single part of it was so jam-packed with amazing things. Oh my God, I was just so excited throughout this entire episode. So yeah, solid 9 for me.
And Mama, what you think?
I would say this, first of all, it's almost James's birthday. It's almost James's birthday. It's his birthday on Saturday. So let's sing happy birthday real quickly. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Jamie. Happy birthday to you. Woo! To the Night's King.
You rock, Charlie, for getting involved, and thank you, Mom. I love it.
With a couple of words, you know.
You got happy birthday in. All right.
And I would give it a 9.5. I'll reserve a 10 till later, but I would give it a 10 because it was super freaking good. Awesome.
Niko, what'd you think?
Hi guys. Yeah, it was really good episode, and yeah, I will give it a 10 because I don't have major complaints. I was entertained the whole time, and major things happened. We finally saw Dany doing what she was supposed to do from the beginning. So, and of course there was Jaime. And like last season, I would allow, Jaime can ride his horse up my field of fire any day. So that was the major moment for me. Okay, I'm just joking. Yeah, but it was really nice to watch this. And as we get into it, I mean, I will touch upon. But yeah, I will give it a 10 because why not? Thank you.
Lovely. And Charlie, what'd you think?
Well, I think I would give it a 9.5, just like you, James. Overall, it was an epic episode. Very difficult for me to give it a 10 just because, like Alizey said, the last episodes are always the ones that are the most epic, most intense ones in every season. I would also say I didn't have any issues per se. I mean, Daenerys finally comes and kicks ass, which makes me very happy. I think maybe the only... I don't even want to say issues per se, maybe like minor smidge questions, complaints, I don't know what I can think of for this episode is maybe a bit of the pacing and a couple things at Winterfell, but we'll get into that as you said. So 9.5 it is for me.
Lovely. I'm glad everybody enjoyed this one. So I've got an initial question for everybody. We can get to the scenes in just a second, but as usual, I kind of have a question to begin with. And my initial question is, why is the Night's King's cave painting, why does it have a beard? And I've got a couple ideas. I thought I'd run past you guys, see what you thought. So we have the long night, and then the long night in the Night's Watch is created during the long night. The White Walkers are defeated and by the last hero. And then you have all these forts built along where the wall will ultimately be, and the wall is built. And it's only 13 Lord Commanders in that you get the Night's King. So before the long night, it was the Children of the Forest and the First Men warring with each other. And we apparently from the show have the White Walkers being created by the Children of the Forest in order to fight the First Men. Then the Children of the Forest and the First Men bind together, unite in order to fight the White Walkers, which is what John's talking about, in my opinion. and that's the God's Eye Pact, which in my opinion started the Starks. The first men and the children of the forest wed their houses and married, which is how you end up with warging humans. There are other humans who also mated with children of the forest, the Crannig men. That's why they look that way, etc. But so the Night's King came after the Long Night. Now it's possible the show is switching up the timelines, so the Night's King came beforehand. We had not even heard the Night's King's origin story in the television show, although I believe that's because they're just holding off because it's so important to his motivations, and they haven't really told us his motivations yet. So the Night's King has a beard in that picture. Here's a couple of options. Either they've changed the timeline and that is in fact the Night's King. And some evidence for that is that the horns that he has, the crown that he has, those are in the exact same position that the current Night's King has. However, he has a beard. So let me make an argument that that's not the Night's King. And I'm not saying this is true, just consider it. The Night's King didn't exist until after the Long Night, after the White Walkers and the humans battled and the humans won. It would make sense for them to have a leader, and a crown would make sense. I can't account for the horns being so precise as they were, but this could be the leader before the Night's King existed. And Alizey's got a great point that I'm just going to kind of steal. You can elaborate on it later, but for the sake of me saying this, well, it's irrelevant to the moment, so you can say it later. But maybe that's not the Night's King. Maybe that's the general before the Long Night was over. Alternatively, it could be the Night's King, and he just lost his beard over enough time. Who the hell knows? But one thing I did want to note is I don't believe, and somebody correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, I don't believe there were whites during the Long Night. I'm not so sure there were. If the Night's King is a green seer, and it's through his ability to green see that he's able to, or that high warging capability, like Bran can warg Hodor, that the Night's King is able to warg the dead. And I've posited before, I'm going off on a tangent, but it's important for me to say this before y'all express your opinion. It's been my opinion that the Night's King was killed, and I'm leaving out a whole bunch of stuff. It's in another video. It's my opinion that the Night's King in human form was killed, but moved his mind into another thing. I'm leaving out a lot about my opinion, but he moved his mind into another thing. And that thing ultimately came back, found his original body, and resurrected it. And then put his mind back into the body. And the combination of a green seer in an undead is why he can warg. Now, the actor that played the human that had the dagger plunged in his heart is the same actor that plays the Night's King. So there's an argument that that is the Night's King, but I don't think so. And even Bran says, you made the others. Wouldn't it make more sense for him to say in that scene, you made the Night's King? It's not what he says. He says, you made the others. Also, if that picture in the cave is the Night's King, and that actor that gets the dagger plunged into his heart is the Night's King, then he didn't have a beard at the beginning. Now, alternatively, he could be shaving. That's a possibility. I don't think likely, but possibility. So let's see if there's anything else I wanted to add to that. Alternatively, he could be a White Walker just like everybody else, but as far as we know, the Night's King was created after the Long Night. It's a big part of the story. So that's all I got for now on that, but I think this is really important. Alizey, you got some thoughts on that?
Well, we discussed this earlier, and my idea kind of piggybacks with James's, in that maybe there has been more than one Night's King. And I think an interesting parallel to both Dany and Jon would be if it turned out that the Night's King is not just magically the leader of the White Walkers, but he is the leader that they chose. They seem to have some form of communication. In the books, at least, they crackle ice at each other. So it stands to reason that, you know, they're an army of relatively sentient beings, unlike the Whites. There's a scene where I think it was Jon attacks one and it's surprise, so they feel emotion. And I think it's just an poignant idea that perhaps the Night's King is leading them and they chose him. To add to that, to go back to the original question, why does he have a beard? If he's their leader, maybe they've had multiple leaders. Maybe the previous leader in the picture that had a beard was killed at some point, and another Night's King came around and replaced him. It does kind of look like the crown is actually coming out of his head, not just placed on his head, so it could be that maybe there's some kind of ceremony, sort of like at a King's Moot, where a White Walker kind of ascends to becoming the Night's King by some magical means that we don't know yet. And of course, this is all conjectured. We don't have a lot to go on for this, but it would be interesting if the White Walkers aren't the emotionless, faceless, fearing force that all the humans south of the wall think that they are. Maybe they have a reason to be coming down. And yeah, that's really all I have to say about that.
To clarify what I believe she's saying, because of what we spoke about earlier, we've been making, I have said in my videos, the White Walkers have art and they have language. We see them making art, and we know they speak to each other, at least in the books. In the TV show, it's less clear, because in the books he can say there's a crackling and they seem to understand each other. In the TV show, you have to show that. So they have art and they have language. That is key to sentience. It's almost the two things that are required to presume they're sentient. What she's adding that I'd never considered is that the White Walkers are not under the direct manipulation of the Night's King's powers. She's saying it's possible that they literally chose him. Now, you got to add to that he's turning babies into them. So that doesn't change what she's saying. Maybe they still have free will, and they are choosing him as any human would choose a leader, as the Lord Commander is chosen. That adds a whole new spin to it. And I'd always thought that once the Night's King was killed, that would remove the thrall nature of them, and then they'd be able to choose from there on. She's suggesting they may already be choosing. And we don't know. We're just talking about theories.
And to go on from that, the real threat would be if they kill the Night's King and another one is capable of taking his place. Well, you cut off one head and another one springs up. There's really no end to it, and that would make the final fight that much more difficult and challenging for all of the armies.
I do disagree with that in part, because it's my belief that the Night's King is special, his greed seer abilities. I do want to add to what I said before we move on to my mom, that there's no whites in that painting, in that cave painting. Not necessarily, there don't necessarily need to be in order for there to have been whites, but if this was during the Long Night and there wasn't a Night's King, it's possible there were no whites. And I think that if there wasn't a Night's King, with the exception of another greed seer, it makes sense for there to not be whites. This is a different race. The White Walkers are not the whites. And it's not the White Walkers who make the whites. It's the Night's King who makes the whites. I also wanted to note that a lot of people have been pointing out that the painting looks different than the other paintings. And I would chalk that up to that painting is by humans. The other paintings are by the Children of the Forest. All right, Mom, what you think?
Well, first of all, I think it's left vague because it's supposed to be left vague until next season. So Martin is doing this intentionally. And so are the showrunners. With respect, I'm gonna state my position. You all can disagree with me, and that's fine. James and I have been fighting for years over this. First of all, the fellow who got stabbed with the obsidian blade by Leaf, the Children of the Forest, that guy was played by Vladimir Furdik, F-U-R-D-I-K. And I think he also was in Prometheus. He has an unusual look. And there's a question between James and I, but Richard Brake was the guy who played the Night's King. And I don't know whether Furdik has played him or not. I don't think he has. James, you can correct me, but don't come in right now. My opinion is that when the Children of the Forest made the White Walkers, that was the obsidian blade that went in him. I don't think he's a Night's King at all. I think we've got the Night's King, who is a super ward, whoever he is. We've got the White Walkers, who are sentient beings. And then we've got the dead people who are the whites. I don't think the White Walkers are thralls per se of the Night's King. I think they are his generals. They are his military force. And it's why he doesn't have females on it. Even though you can argue with me, there are some women who are warriors. We've seen them on the show, but he needed a military force. Now, my opinion is that, and clearly we've seen it in the show, the White Walkers were created by the children of the forest to fight against mankind. And when they formed the pact between the children of the forest and mankind, the White Walkers were like a bacteria or virus they created that they could not then control. And when they lost control of them and the White Walkers didn't know what to do, I mean, they're confused. It sure would have been easy pickings for them to choose somebody who came along and was able to control them in some kind of mind way and become their generals. That's my opinion. The dead people are the dead people. They're nothing. They're just resurrected dead people. And they only do what the Night's King tells them to do, and they're directed by the generals. Now, so I don't think the Night's King has been around as long as the White Walkers. I think that's clearly been set out. I don't think the Night's King has been around as long as the White Walkers. I'm going to make that very clear. And of course, the mythology is that the original Night's King, it's a mythology, was the 13th Lord Commander of the Wall. So the Wall's there to fight against the White Walkers. So we know if the Night's King was the 13th Lord Commander, he came long after the White Walkers. Okay, because the wall had already been built. Who he is questionable. Well, why he has a beard, I don't know. What I'm curious about is this. And I still think he's Bran Stark. I don't know if the original one was the original Bran Stark or if our Bran is it, or just emulating him. But what I think might be more interesting is twofold. Number one, I'm not sure John has interpreted those cave paintings correctly. And if he hasn't, I mean, he just automatically said this is what they are. We don't know what they mean. This is like the Lascaux cave paintings in France they found. You can't interpret them iconoclastically. You can't look at it like today. These were created a long, long, long time ago. We don't know what the history was at that time. So let's just preserve that for a moment. The other thing is, there were a fair amount of talk this season about switching sides. Davos made a point of it talking to John. We'll get into it later, but my point is, I'll be curious if the White Walkers change sides. We're going to see a lot of discussions later on about what their allegiance is. Maybe they don't want to be White Walkers anymore. I mean, we'll see. That's all I have to say on that. The beard, I think, is an anomaly. It just means it's old. I don't know. That's it.
Where's James?
MP, what you think? We're talking about why the Night's King has a beard.
I would just say that I think he's similar to the Three-Eyed Raven in the fact that he's somebody that recycles over and over, whether it's in arguably the same vein as Bran, where it's the same person that recycles over and over. I don't know, but it definitely could be. But I think that it's just one connotation of the Night's King, and there's been others after him. Whether or not it's sharing the same conscience as the original, I don't know.
Got it. According to the A Wiki of Ice and Fire, there were undead. According to Westerosi legends, in the midst of this darkness, a race of apparent demons called the Others emerged from the uttermost north of Westeros, the polar regions of the lands of always winter. They wielded razor-thin swords of ice and raised whites to fight the living. So according to, and that's from the 4th Bran chapter in Game of Thrones, the 24th chapter overall. So according to that, there were whites during this time. I'm going to look at this book and see what it says about it. But for a while, Niko, what'd you think?
Oh, I think, well, there's a lot of things on my mind because you touched upon so many. But let's start from the beginning. Why does he have a beard? Well,
Niko, can you move your mic closer to your mouth?
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So I'm looking at the picture now on internet. So I think that they decided to put it like this in the cave, meaning the film department, that you can distinguish between that there is a leader between, you know, amongst the others or White Walkers. Because if you look at the other three guys that are holding the ice swords, they look similar. So if you put a beard on the guy, and clearly has blue eyes, all of them actually, but he has really prominent blue eyes. You can see the color and you see the crown, but you know, like if you would not put beard on it, then you would not distinguish him from the others, if you get what I'm saying. So maybe that's why I decided on that. I don't know. Maybe they should, you know, like producers should touch upon that, but I don't think there's a deeper meaning than that. I only think that it's for the reader in a cave, whoever reaches the cave and sees this, that there is an enemy, you know, of the people. Sounds really weird when I say it loud, but the enemy, there's a lot of them and they have a leader. It's like a warning. So like it's, if you would put some kind of, you know, if you would have to warn future generations of something, you would have to do it really simple, right? For everybody to understand, like in symbols. And just, I would do it like that, like this, because you cannot use the language. It's harder to interpret the language, but pictures are better, right? So if you see there are, you know, like ominous looking creatures, there's a leader, so beware of that. Also, the celestial looking signs, like the spiral we saw at the first thing at the beginning of the show, right? The bodies are like a spiral galaxy, I don't know, whatever. I think that they also put it there, so if you see bodies put in stuff, you know, like in these formations, then you have to be aware that another long night is coming. That's how I see it. Now, maybe it's not that they know science, as we said. I mean, you said, James, like they know art and language, but is it science or is it just, you know, like, I don't know, we have swastika and stuff like that, these symbols from before, right, of the comments, but people were not able to see the way the galaxy looks, like Andromeda, the closest galaxy, without the help of the instruments. So I don't know, but the spiral is, I don't know, it's a nice symbol. What the fuck did I write here? Language. Oh yeah, and the leader, why does he have a beard? I'm sorry, there's some fucking stupid bike outside. The leaders are usually old and wise, and it usually, like, classically has a beard, right? Like Gandalf or whatever, putting it in real world terms. So maybe that's why they wanted to warn it with, because beard means these things. Now the question I want to ask you all is, I think that's the major question: why are they coming again? Is it to get revenge on not just people, but the children of the forest or something? Because they're moving south. The thing that is south that is significant to them is the God's Eye. Maybe they're going there. I don't know. But maybe somebody in the comments has a good idea. So please share with us. That's all I have to say. And I'm going to let MP and Charlie talk. Thank you guys for listening.
Good stuff. Thank you, Niko. So according to this, the legends don't, that I'm wrong about the legends. Yet there are other tales, harder to credit and yet more central to the old histories, about creatures known as the Others. According to these tales, they came from the frozen lands of always winter, bringing the cold and darkness with them as they sought to extinguish all light and warmth. The tales go on to say they rode monstrous ice spiders and the horses of the dead, resurrected to serve them, just as they resurrected dead men to fight on their behalf. So according to that, yeah, that presumption is wrong. So that means somebody could raise the dead before there was a Night's King. Yeah, so, oh, and about the galaxies you mentioned, it's not far-fetched to consider that a lot of this magic is actually a result of science from Martin's Thousand Worlds that this planet had technology, it just lost it when humans were scattered to the wind in those books. Charlie?
Alrighty, where to begin? Let me just sit up properly. Night's King's beard. Yeah, I did find it also a bit weird. I did not notice it actually until you brought that up, James. On the contrary, however, the other White Walkers that we know that do have beards in the show don't seem to have beards in the representation. So I thought that was kind of an interesting, I guess, switch or flip. At the same time, I think the representation of the Night's King doesn't look that different from how we see him in the show in his actual form versus the way the cave paintings interpret him or show him. I kind of like actually Niko's interpretation of, you know, why they show him with a beard, personally. That said, I think how do I start this off? I guess it goes back to the whole, you know, Night King versus Night King. I remember George R. R. Martin wrote a while ago in response to some question regarding the two characters, the legend of the Night's King on the wall and the 13th Lord Commander versus the Night King. Or at least that's how he calls this, you know, leader of the White Walkers, as a way to almost to distinguish the two from one another. So I kind of took that as an indication that those two characters are very different. Also, in one of the DVDs for Game of Thrones, they actually addressed that legendary 13th Lord Commander, and they kind of present him as being, you know, almost a standalone figure, very, very different and separate from the character we know as the Night King in the TV show, as in the, you know, White Walker leader, if that makes any sense. What else did I have to say? I liked your theory, James, about, you know, interpreting, well, it's one you brought up before in the past. Again, I think the main issue is just I don't see that type of theory working its way within the confines of the show. I always go back to, you know, the amount of episodes left, but it's also just in terms of complexity. I think it's more book focus as a theory rather than show focus. So I'm inclined not to think that, you know, Benioff and Weiss are going to go that far into expanding the Night King's role in the show. The other thing I had to say was Niko has to question, why are they coming again? Well, I actually made a bit of a video on that, comparing the Valyrians to the White Walkers to the others. My whole argument kind of revolved around the fact that the Valyrians are no longer really a threat to them. I realized the Valyrian freehold arose thousands of years after the Long Night. But to summarize my point is, I think that the White Walkers were aware of the existence of the Valyrians in some capacity, just as I think the Valyrians were aware of the White Walkers in some capacity, or at least the Targaryens at the very least were, in whatever function. Given the fact that, you know, we had characters like Daenerys the Dreamer, one of the Targaryen ancestors, who could see visions of different events, including the doom of Valyria. So TLDR is, I think, the main reason why the White Walkers didn't venture south is that there were Targaryens to the south to potentially prevent them. But I'm entering a whole other crackpot territory. That's just my own personal interpretation of why they haven't ventured so far south so at this point. Of course, we could look at other possibilities, you know, like global warming and the world of Westeros or some type of issue. But as far as I can tell, that's kind of where I'm leaning towards in terms of answering your question, Niko. I think that's all I really had on that point. Yeah, summarize. I don't think the fact that the White Walker or the Night King has a beard in the walls of the cave is something to focus on too much. I think it was maybe just a creative choice on behalf of the White Walkers, or on behalf of the Children of Forest, or the First Men who painted that. Anyway, that's all.
Lovely stuff. And I unfortunately, I don't really have an answer to any of this. So, all right, we'll continue on with the Dragonstone stuff. So in that particular scene, John, Dany is walking down the steps with her Dothraki guards, and Missandei and Dany converse about whatever happened with Grey Worm, and she says things happened. And then Dany is called upon by Jon. Dany apparently feels comfortable enough with Jon to continue without her Dothraki guard, so she continues down. And that's when Jon takes her into the caves and shows her the dragon glass, which was a beautiful scene, and then shows her the cave paintings of the Children of the Forest, and tells her the story of the Children of the Forest and humans working together in order to fight the Night's King, or the others, and shows her the painting of the others. He grabs her arm in order to do that. That is clearly intentional. And then she says she will fight with the North. She will fight for the North when you bend the knee. And every single person I've seen a reaction who watched that is really fucking excited. And then when she says that, it's like, oh, come on. Once in a while, they're like, yeah, I mean, you got to bend the knee. I think we're going to have an in-depth discussion about this in just a second, but that I don't think is as apparent as I think some do. My mom, maybe. I think that Dany is, there's no good answer to this. Who should lead? And she's trying to unite all the kingdoms. It's what she believes is her right on a couple of different levels, and that she's the best person for it. So she's demanding fealty from all the different lords. Otherwise, what is the kingdom? So I understand why she's saying it. She also doesn't understand the threat. And I think with that, I called last episode that it would happen this episode, but I'm going to move it on to next episode, that we're going to get a marriage proposal. Alizey made a good point about the metaphor there. I'll let her say in just a second. I just want to note that. But we're going to get a marriage proposal in the next episode, in my opinion, but it's going to be contingent on Jon bringing back evidence of the others. So we also got Jon meeting Jon and Davos meeting Missandei, and there being a story about there being no such thing as a bastard on Noth, and that that's because there's no marriage on Noth. This is all building up, in my opinion, to ultimately we need rules that bastards, it doesn't matter if you're a bastard, and this has got to be developed in the show, and that's why this is in there. To reinforce the importance of bastards being able to inherit and not being treated as lesser. We also got Jon seeing Theon. Theon was submissive to Jon, and Jon told Theon that if it weren't for what Theon did for Sansa, Jon would kill Theon. I think that's big talk. I'm not sure Jon would do that at this point. Theon's first words to Jon are, "Hey, Jon, didn't know you were here. And is Sansa okay?" I think that's important that his first words were that. I also skipped over that when Jon and Missandei are talking, Jon says, "Why'd you leave Noth?" No, I think Davos asked, "Why'd you ever leave Noth?" And she says, "I was taken by slavers." And Jon has this really awkward, "Oh, I'm sorry," which is, I mean, what can you do? I mean, he can't really fix the situation. All he can do is empathize, and there's no way for him to express in words the proper empathy. So I think, cutting it short. I think that's everything that happened in Dragonstone. If not, correct me. Alizey, some thoughts on that?
Well, I do think the most important thing about that scene, before I start talking about that, I just had one more point about our last point that I didn't get to say. I think those symbols are a language, and we're going to see that language come up again. We saw it in the very first season. Those spirals are the same things that the White Walkers created out of people. They have some kind of meaning. And who better to decipher that meaning than Missandei? She doesn't necessarily know that language, but she knows enough languages that she could potentially piece it together through the symbols. And this comes from the discussion where James was saying that Missandei could translate for the White Walkers, and I don't think she's going to be able to translate their spoken language, but written language can be translated. If any of you have seen Arrival, there are ways that you can interpret the meanings of symbols, and I think those symbols have astronomical meanings for sure, like what Niko said. And I think that's going to have a lot of significance that we really need to unpack as theorists. To go back to Jon and Dany, that sexual tension was intense. And the best way for Jon to bend the knee is if he bends the knee to propose. I think the smartest thing for them to do in the situation where both of them are losing, basically, Jon is losing his men. Well, he hasn't yet, but I'm assuming at this next Eastwatch episode, we're going to see some casualties. And Dany's been losing a lot. This way, they can forge an alliance without any animosity necessarily. Pretty much the opposite of animosity, and we've gotten so much foreshadowing for that in this episode, with Davos saying that Jon's been staring at her good heart quite a lot. I liked that part. I saw a lot of sexual tension in that scene, especially when they were looking at each other very closely. When he led her by the elbow, he was basically touching her, kind of like Daario did. And when they walked out of the cave, I actually thought that they were holding hands because they were walking so close. Of course, when the camera panned out again, they weren't. But I think that was done intentionally. And I think this is all foreshadowing for some kind of coming marriage between them. I genuinely think that that's going to be a huge plot point coming up.
And to add to some stuff that wasn't mentioned about this particular scene, she mentioned the intimacy. She and I both watched the episode together, and we both kind of had the same thought that when Jon and Dany were leaving the cave, the cut was from behind them, and they were so close it looked like they were holding hands. You couldn't see their hands; it was below the screen, but it was clear they had done that intentionally. They're walking so close together that it looks like they're holding hands. Also, Jon and Dany are in a cave. Last time Jon was in a cave was when he lost his virginity. And a cave is a huge part of the hero's journey, and we're going to talk about that more with Bran, but that's extremely important. Another thing I haven't mentioned is that Dany says to Jon exactly what Jon says to Mance Rayder. Isn't their survival, your people's survival, more important than your pride? And Jon doesn't respond, not because he doesn't have an answer to that, but because he's had this conversation before and been on the other side. He just understands what this means. It's important for him to consider, but he can't claim to be the same kind of person that Mance Rayder was, although he's pretty damn close considering he brought Wildlings and the Northmen together. And that also ties into Dany shortly thereafter asking him to kneel, which was the Wildlings saying is, "We do not kneel." Mama, your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I'm going to be a real Debbie Downer on y'all. I love the scenes. Absolutely love them. I think it's so heavy-handed on this that it's not going to happen. That's my opinion. I mean, it's just, yeah, they may marry just so everybody feels comfortable that they're on the same plane, but I don't think they're ever going to have a sexual relationship. I think it's just too heavy-handed. And it's certainly there. I can't deny it. Everything you've said is there, but it's like beating us over the head with it. I do want to talk about the, and also remember, Dany's barren. And so Jon and she could never have a child. And that's not going to be a real long legacy, folks. So at any rate, about the Mance Rayder argument, I think that was one of the most important parts of these particular scenes. This is exactly what Jon said, as James mentioned, and we've talked about it today and yesterday. Jon said to Mance, are you so proud that you can't bend the knee and save your people? And Mance realizes that Jon doesn't get it at that point. And he kind of shakes his head and says, he starts talking about being a Night's Watch brother and that kind of thing, because Jon can't grasp what he's trying to tell him. Once you're a leader of people, if you give in like that, you've lost that group of people. So every time I watched a reaction where people were like, "Oh my God, Jon, just bend the knee," I'm like, are you kidding? He'd lose the fucking entire North if he did that. He can't do it. And then I thought, what about your pride, Dany? Why don't you bend the fucking knee? I mean, you've already at some point, we're going to lose some of those dragons. And, we've seen she's getting knocked down a few notches, I think, according to the next preview. But at any rate, she really pissed me off, Charlie. She pissed me off so much this scene, I wanted to throw the goddamn books out the window. But at any rate, it's there for a reason. I get it. but they're going to have to come to some meeting of the minds as to how to handle this. I want to talk about the marriage thing. And James, I disagree with you about bastards. Bastards are fine. I'm not making a comment on bastards. Anybody could have been a bastard in the world. I want to talk about the importance of marriage, though, in those times. And I've practiced family law for quite a while. And, you know, our family law is based on English matrimonial laws. And, of course, one of the reasons for marriage is to align houses. But another reason is that any child born during a marriage, even now, is presumed to be a legitimate child. Now, with the recent advent of DNA testing, that's changed somewhat. And I have actually watched that in the courts progress, because that test wasn't there when I first started practicing law. And I can remember trying cases based on relationships between people and whether or not it's possible a child could be outside of a marriage. But the law is, and was then, the presumption is born during marriage, it's legitimate. And I have actually heard of cases in the past where people would actually parade the child in front of the judge and say, does it look like the father? Now, I gotta say, I got 3 completely different looking children. And that is a sore test for proving paternity, but that's the way it was. If you start allowing bastards back then, with their DNA test now, it really doesn't matter too much. And plus, you know, most of us aren't in the royal hierarchy. But back then, marriage was super important to establish who is the proper heir, because you don't want somebody coming from left field who could have just been lying about their heritage, coming in and saying that they might have a claim to the throne. So I think that's a super important issue. Now, back to the foreshadowing of Jon's heritage and the marriage of Rhaegar and Lyanna. You know, he made some comments in that scene, my parents weren't married or something like that. You know, I think that Sam has gotten those documents at the Citadel that he's about to rewrite and decipher. I think those might have some clues as to that marriage. We'll see. Jon said to Davos, I don't have time for that. And I don't think he has time for a romance. So I think this is all heavy-handed stuff. Yeah, there's some tension there. They're both beautiful people. They're both young. And you know what happens when young people get together. Nature has a great plan for that. But Dany can't have kids. I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, short responses to some of the stuff you said and adding some other stuff. I don't think they're going to get married either. They may get married. I mean, my opinion is she's going to join the Night's King and end up dead by the end. I think a lot of us think she's going to end up dead by the end. But so a marriage may happen. I think the likelihood is just that they have the proposal. But I'm not 100% sure whether I think the marriage will happen or not, but it ain't going to last. So, and I would side on it's not going to happen. Another mention of the romance, the scene you mentioned, Mom, with Davos. Davos, she has a good heart. I've seen you looking at her heart. Something to that extent, Davos says to Jon. Jon's response to that is, I don't have time for that, and he goes back into the Night's King thing. They have really overdone that in this season, that Jon just keeps going back to, I've seen the Night's King, y'all don't understand. And that's true and important, and it's what's on his mind, and that's an important thing for a leader. He can't be sidetracked from the main thing. But at the same time, they do it so much that in this scene, they force us to go, come on, Jon. For those of us who like the idea of Jon and Dany ending up together, which I don't, but it's clearly set up. We all roll our eyes and go, shut the fuck up. You can have sex once in a while and have love and still be a leader. So I also wanted to mention that Davos refers to him as King Snow, and then he says, no, that doesn't sound right. King Jon, which was a throwback clearly. Also, Davos says to Jon after Missandei describes the lack of marriage in Noth, Davos says, can I switch sides? I don't know if that was foreshadowing for him necessarily, but that is foreshadowing for the shit that we're going to have over the next season and a half of differences of goals and people switching sides between not just Cersei and Dany, but Dany and Jon and the other side of Jon. Anyway, all right. So, Maester Payne.
Hi, sorry everyone, I'm having computer difficulties. Just going back to the symbols and everything like that, if I can. Alizey, I love the idea of the symbols as a language. Probably, in my thinking, after you said that, is White Walkers trying to communicate with people when they have no actual voice, so to speak. So they're doing it through reference, and I love the idea of Missandei being the one to interpret it. I thought that was brilliant. LaDonna, or somebody mentioned Jon in the caves. Last time we saw Jon in the cave was the Kissed by Fire episode, which in this time you apply that to Dany when he's in the cave again. There's a little bit of Kissed by Fire there again. I agree with you guys that I think Jon will do the proposal. Whether or not the marriage goes through, I don't know. It'll be a marriage of convenience rather than a marriage of love, in my thinking, although it could be love, who knows. I do think Dany can get pregnant still. I think once all the, you won't be pregnant until this happens, that happens, and the other thing, I think once all that's done, she will be able to get pregnant, and it will take somebody like either the Night's King or Jon, being the ice side of things, to actually impregnate her, and I think we see that a bit later on. What else were we talking about? Sorry? Like, what was the actual...
Everything that happened at Dragonstone. So, Missandei and Dany talking, Dany and Jon talking, Jon and Theon talking, and Jon and Davos and Missandei talking.
I did believe that the message of Dany's heart and Jon staring at it all the time could allude to sort of like the Azor Ahai prophecy of Nissa Nissa and stabbing it through the heart. I do have quite a bit here. TeeBaby herself says that she wanted, and I think you guys have referenced this, but Jon being put in the same sort of situation that he put Mance in, about not bending the knee and everything like that. She doesn't believe, as far as I know, that he'll ever do it. Regardless, I mean, maybe she does if it's a proposal, but I don't think she just thinks he's willingly going to bend the knee. She also made a point to say that every time Jon approaches Dany and we see them together, we see the dragons flying off in the background, which she thinks means that Jon will fly a dragon this season. Sorry. What else do I have on this? I don't know. I can't remember. Oh, the symbols. I think one of the symbols was possibly alluding to what Dany's handmaiden said about one of the moons flying too close to the egg. So one of the symbols is a circle with a smaller circle in it. I think maybe that was an eclipse that actually got too close to the moon and blew up, thus creating asteroids, which people could see as dragons. I also want to point out that somebody, I think Niko, asked earlier, there's an old Martin story about an asteroid that flies by the world, and it's actually alien beings, and as it passes, they create war between the people below, and then it flies away again, and of course returns, and so on and so forth. We do have that sort of in this book, and then the White Walkers are rising again, so maybe that could be why, Niko. The spirals, I think, can be interpreted either as all things going into one thing, or sort of like the Eye of the Giant, where the world's coming out of that sort of eye sort of situation. Also, it was pointed out to me that they all have 8 legs, 8 different things, which may be symbolic of a cracking, because there's one where it looks like there's a boat sort of floating above it too. I think I have more, but I can't think of it all at the moment. So hopefully everything's good with my computer and actually be able to pay attention to what everybody's saying now.
And we'll come back to everybody. Niko?
Okay, can you hear me good, like well now? Okay, so in the first segment, I forgot to say that I'm a bit with LaDonna and a bit with James on the White Walkers. Yeah, I believe that we should trust whatever Old Nan says. So if she says there was a White Walkers and then the Night King story, so I believe that White Walkers existed, and I buy into theory of hypothesis of James and LaDonna about Valyrians and similarities between Valyrians and White Walkers. So yeah, I think the Night King was just a guy, the 13th Lord Commander, but the White Walkers existed before. Now, these scenes, I like these scenes actually, the whole Dragonstone sequence. So let's first talk about the cave. The cave is a feminine symbol, I presume, right? If you look at psychology, and it's Jon always with the fire ladies. First with Ygritte, now with Daenerys, and that's why I don't think there was so much acting, but more what we know from before, and we know that Jon had the Lord's kiss thing in the cave. Yeah, he lost his virginity with Ygritte in a cave, so that's why we are hyped about it, and that's why the directors are playing with it. So basically hyping up the crowd, and I think they're gonna have sex, although I don't think that. I personally don't care about it, but yeah, I see why not. Put it there. I think LaDonna is wrong. Yeah, they're gonna have so much sex. So what the fuck did I write here? I like how Davos is always admiring well-educated or smart women. I think he's really cool guy. And I would say that the first thing I screamed when I was watching the episode with my husband, he was oblivious what I was talking about, but when this scene with Davos, Jon, and Missandei, when they were talking, and Jon said, she has a good heart. The first thing I said was, Nisa Nisa. This is how I see it. I'm not going to hypothesize about it, but I think they're putting like subliminal messages to us. So when it happens, you're like, oh yeah. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is how I saw it. Also, subliminal messages, why is Davos questioning Jon's name? I think we're gonna get some kind of confirmation, as LaDonna put it, for Sam's researching the papers, the scrolls, whatever. Excuse me. I think that Sam's probably gonna find out about the marriage between Rhaegar and Lyanna, and there's gonna be a baby's name. So maybe that's why they included that in the script. So what is his name? We talked about it a long time ago. What the fuck did I write here? And as for MP, I didn't read any other George Martin shit. So it was James that talks about this book that's like, what did you say, 100 Worlds? That's like.
I was just referring to how you asked the question of why the White Walkers were coming, and that could be a reason.
Yeah. I think that they're coming for revenge to kill children of the forest or something. I don't know. This is my opinion, because we never get anything about like their point of view. Why are they doing? They probably have some justification for this war. Also for cosmic, what did you question spirals? I don't know. Did you know, like, guys, FYI, we don't know why there are spirals, like why there are spiral galaxies. It's still not explained. There are some hypotheses by Lin and Shu, but it's actually pretty hard math, and it's not quite understood why we have the spiral branches and galaxies. So that's it for me. I'm gonna stop with science now. Thank you.
We do love the science, though, Niko, and you are a source for that. By the way, if anybody's noticing the sound on my mom's in the background on my mom's video, those are cicadas. Maester Payne?
You did just go to me earlier. I do have a few things to add, though. LaDonna, shit, what was it? I do think Jon was interpreting the symbols wrong. And like I say, we don't know. It could definitely be wrong. I'm just throwing it out there that it could also be symbolic of the marriage between the first men and the children, figuratively, symbolically, not, well, I don't know, maybe. I mean, all of a sudden men have green sight, right? So who knows? But and also perhaps even showing the creation of the White Walkers, because it appears that we know that that's what we saw happen in the one video, although arguably perhaps they were creating somebody to take control of them, giving them the power to move those masses, and that sort of backfired. I mean, I don't know. But that's all I had to say about that, and I think maybe it's Charlie that's up to talk.
You're right, Charlie.
Hey, folks. All right, I'll try to keep my notes concise. They're a bit sporadic right here, unfortunately. Back to the beginning. I agree with your thoughts on, I guess, the legitimacy of bastards, James. That was one of the original comments. I really think the show at this point is kind of meant to demonstrate that Westeros' society is in a complete social upheaval, and it's really going to change by the end of this series, after the White Walkers are dealt with. Bastards are ruling, more importantly, though, I think we have queens ruling, not only without any dynastic ties, but also in their own names. I'm thinking here of Cersei, of course, because remember, even the Baratheons ruled because they had Targaryen ancestors. That was kind of their legitimizing claim on the Iron Throne. So I think that kind of just goes to show that everything is being flipped on its head. The whole Westeros society is being flipped on its head, and it's going to really, really be one of the marking traits, I guess, for Westeros when all is said and done. With that said, I do partially disagree with your thoughts, LaDonna, with respect to marriage in the context of Game of Thrones. Obviously, I agree with you in the context of our own world, especially with respect to our past, particularly the medieval past. However, we are dealing with a fantasy universe, which is, of course, medieval, but it is still a fantasy universe, so things are different in their world than ours. Even though it's inspired by our own, it's already been demonstrated time and time again in many circumstances that bastards can inherit. It's actually already happened so many times in Game of Thrones with, Jon Snow, as far as we know, Ramsay Bolton, who was previously a bastard, Oris Baratheon, the list more or less goes on. Moving on. Alizey mentioned the marriage between Jon and Daenerys. I agree with you on that. Also, Arrival is a great movie. I saw it a while ago. I wrote, agree with your thoughts, James. I don't know what that refers to, but it must have been something good. Oh, yeah. There are also, this is my own thoughts now, there have been some memes floating around hypothesizing that Jon was the one who drew the White Walkers and the Children of the Forest in the cave. Just thought I'd share that funny little anecdote. It would be kind of interesting if Jon decided to, try to convince Dany that way. Also, seeing Jon and Theon reunited was very interesting to me personally. In a way, if you watch back the first season, especially the first episode of Game of Thrones, we see Jon, Robb, and Theon acting kind of like brothers from the very beginning. They're all close in age, so they really played up how close they all were with respect to one another at the very start. And as much as I hate the fact that Theon did betray Robb and the Starks, I feel like he has repented himself somewhat. So when I saw the scene with Jon and Theon just staring each other down, I could just sense that mixed emotion coming from both of those characters in a way that I just wanted to, yell at Jon to tell him to forgive Theon, treat him like his brother, who was, presumably one of the closest people to him when he was growing up. And that kind of mirrored the scene in Winterfell when we had the other Starks reunited. I mean, obviously, Sansa, Arya, and Bran were also, in their own ways, close to Jon and Theon. But, I mean, those three characters were, I guess, more similar in age than Jon, Robb, and Theon were. So it's kind of, I guess, a rejoining of these two different groups of Starks. I use that word loosely, obviously, in this context. What else did I have here? I had other thoughts in my head, but I just can't think of them. I did not note them down, unfortunately, so I'll just end things at that.
One thing I'd like to add is that Dany asked Jon for his advice on what to do. Dany clearly wanted to attack the Red Keep, was advised against it. She actually attacked Tyrion this episode and said, maybe you don't want your family dead, and our enemies are your family. When she asked Jon his advice, Jon said, I didn't think dragons existed. You brought the impossible into the world. That makes people believe that maybe you can give them the impossible, a world that isn't full of shit like the world they know. But if you start burning towers and cities to the ground, you're not different. You're just more of the same. That is a mirroring, I mean, what a great short little advice. And she took it. Clearly she took it. But it's also Jon. I mean, he's talking about himself. He was resurrected. That's an impossible thing. And it's because of that, it's not because of that, but partly because of that they have such hope in him, such belief. And they do for a lot of other reasons, but it certainly supports it. And that goes to talk about the significance of a miracle or a prophecy, regardless of its actual supernatural nature. If people believe that you've done something miraculous, then the presumption is that there's something special about you. And that's the irony of Beric Dondarrion. The Hound tells him there's nothing special about you. So what? And that's the thing about miracles. If the unlikelihood of there ever being a miracle and the impossibility of proving it's a miracle, and the statistical likelihood that there is an explanation rather than a supernatural situation. Plus, I never really understand that. If something supernatural happens, if you can see it occur, that means it's measurable in the real world, which means it's natural. So it's got a supernatural source. Anyway, point is the significance of there being a miracle or something supernatural occurring, regardless of whether it actually is a miracle, something literally unexplainable by science. The belief in it grants a lot of power. All right, so I would like to move to Cersei at King's Landing, and then we can go to the battle, and then we'll go to Winterfell. So Cersei at King's Landing, there's not a whole lot there. It's just a conversation between her and what's his name? Tycho Nestoris, thank you. And Tycho says a couple things. He says I believe this was this episode, the lenders will be disappointed their interest rates will end, that we've never had a lump sum payment for such a large amount, that they will be disappointed that we won't have more interest. And Cersei responds, well, then let's start some more interest. And Tycho Nestoris says basically that we are behind you once the money gets here. So just to make sure everybody caught it, in the episode, Randall Tarly tells Jaime, and we're not talking about the Jaime situation, but it's important. Randall Tarly tells Jaime that the gold is already at King's Landing. So we got to presume that that's the case. I just want to talk about, I know this is a small situation, but I want to talk about the idea of investing in such a large entity. Governments don't pay their loans back. I mean, there's a couple of small exceptions. They pay them back in bits, and there's kind of just like this acceptance that you invest in a country that you think it will be productive. And that's one reason to believe that the U.S. maybe it's not that big of a deal that we have such a large debt, because countries are still investing in us. They still believe we're going to be economically progressive. But she's paying off a loan. She's just paying it off. Every little bit, she's using all that money to pay it off, when she could just continue to make interest rates and use that money to invest in the war. Now, I've got some student loans. I would like to just straight up pay them off. But you really need to sit down and calculate, what's the better option? Am I better off putting this in a mutual fund and a money market account and a couple of high yield stocks? You really need to map that out. And I'm no fucking expert, don't get me wrong. My bank account would agree I'm no expert. But just paying it off is not always the most financially beneficial situation. What's most financially beneficial for her is to win this fucking war. That's what's most beneficial. And maybe that money would be more, you'll get your turn. Maybe the money would be better spent in that way. Plus, So imagine that the money gets there and she pays Tycho off, with the exception of him saying that she has his support, which we know he already told them. Tycho and the Iron Bank already told Cersei and Tywin that a while back, and meanwhile we're giving money to Stannis. We watched that happen. So though that may be true, they gamble, which means they bet on multiple people. And ultimately, you bet on two people, their hope. If you bet on two people and one wins, they're still going to pay interest. So you could make more money by just investing in both, depending on how the money is made. Presuming we can't trust his word, so Cersei pays it off, he could just bounce. He has no ties to her anymore. It's been paid off. He gets to choose. Her paying it off does not necessarily make him want to invest in her. In fact, banks don't really want you to pay it off. Credit cards don't want you to pay that monthly payment. They want you to miss it so that they can get a little bit of interest every month. That's how they make their money, that and selling our information. So he actually kind of has an interest in not having it paid off. So anyway, I know that's way broader than the actual topic. Also, Cersei straight up brings him into the map and says, here's my plan. That you do, if you want a business loan, need to show them your general structure. But if you're giving away your product secrets, you're asking for somebody at the bank to go, well, we should start our own fucking product. Not the brightest thing. Anyway, stuff to think about. Alizey.
Well, she said she's paying it off so she can open a new line of credit, essentially, with the Golden Company. And I think first of all, I was wrong last week about the gold not getting there. And I'm kind of bitter about that because I really didn't want the gold to get there. But now we're probably going to see the Golden Company either this season or next season. That's going to be another army that Daenerys is going to have to deal with unless they flip for whatever reason. I still kind of hold in my heart my theory that at some point the Iron Bank is going to get pissed off at Cersei and send the Faceless Men after her. And I'm really hoping that the Faceless Men are going to come to Arya and be like, a girl knows a name. I'm just really hoping that will happen, but I think the whole thing with the Iron Bank is that we're going to see the Golden Company as a result, because she already foreshadowed that part. I do wonder if Cersei promised the gold without knowing exactly how much was in Highgarden, so that there could still be a chance that there isn't enough to pay off the entire lump sum. And we haven't seen we haven't seen what happens once the gold got to King's Landing. So it could be, maybe some of the commoners take some of it. I'm still just holding on to hopes that all the gold doesn't get there so Cersei can be fucked in that way. That's really all I have to say.
Good points. Mama?
Yeah, Alizey, I think you made good points, but I don't agree with you. Number one, I think the gold did get there, and I'm buying in with James on this issue. Banks.
I think you misunderstood her, right?
I said the gold did get there. I was just,
No, I did not disagree with you on that. Here's the deal. James is absolutely right. Banks don't make money getting their investment back. They could put that in a vault. They're not making money. The whole point is interest, and that's what TychoNesteros said. He said, I got some investors who aren't going to be real happy because they were banking on the interest. The other thing is, once Cersei gives them the money, as James said, they're not invested anymore with her. And I think she made a critical error saying that she was going to give her money to the Golden Company. Now, let me talk to you about the Golden Company. They're not going to really go into this in the show, but they did that as a nod, I think, to the book readers. They'll use the Golden Company, but they're not going to give you the background. The Golden Company was created by some bastard Targs. And I don't care if y'all disagree with me. I still say that Jaime and Cersei are bastard Targaryens. So I think that it's a subtle nod to book readers. First of all, the Golden Company doesn't give a shit about anybody. I mean, you think banks don't care? These guys are the sellswords of the world. You think Braun's a sellsword? These guys are the sellswords. What do they say? Beneath the something is the bitter steel. So I think Cersei made a tremendous error paying that debt off, and I do think she paid it off. Now the Iron Bank doesn't give a shit about her. And they know her plan, James, you're right. They also know she's going to invest in some other people. I think they're going to, as you've said, they're going to invest in some other possible rulers. And that could be Dany. I thought that was a great scene. And I loved it when Cersei got bored with him and started looking at the wine. And she went over and poured herself a big-ass glass of wine, and then took him out onto that map and showed her plan. She is a fucking idiot. I don't have much else to say about that, except I think that was a critical investment error on her part. And she played it so well. Lena Headey, you are the woman.
Yeah, it goes without saying that the acting this season is going way up. Jamie deserves a fucking Emmy for this episode, but we'll get to that. I did want to add, it would be really funny if the gold's delivered, Tycho gets it and bounces, and we see him at Dragonstone an episode later with, what a coincidence, some gold to lend Dany. The same amount. All right. MP?
I don't have much about the whole scene except for the mention of the Golden Company. I'm wondering if it's possible that we have some more Lannister relatives, perhaps in employment with them. I believe they were mentioned in the show. Thinking about either Garyon or Tig, I'm not sure, but I think Tyrion did mention one of them, and whether or not they'll come back at that point. And I'm also wondering if perhaps Daario might use this as an excuse to come back and hook up with Dany. But that's really all I have to say about anything Golden Company or that whole bank scene.
Got it. And Niko?
Sorry, we have somebody watching from actually where I live. So, hi, Mate. I don't know the guy. Anyway, I like the scenes. It was short. It was sweet. I mean, with the Cersei, the only thing, and I agree with James and LaDonna regarding the banks. And well, I should know about it. That because I'm really good at spending money. Yeah, they want you to keep you in debt. That's the whole point of banks. But the only thing I did not like what Cersei did was, why the fuck would you discuss your war strategies with a bank investment? I mean, with some random dude. I mean, they probably did it so if they're gonna bring Golden Company into the show, so they have to mention it before it happens, right? But what the fuck, Cersei? I mean, what the fuck? That's all I can say. What the fuck? You don't talk about these kind of things, you know, like the only person she should talk about it is like her war council, if she has one, like Jamie and nobody else. So that's it for me.
All right. And Charlie? You looking comfortable over there, Charlie?
I'm a little jet lagged, as you could tell, so I'm enjoying my my chatting with y'all in the bed. Anyway, King's Landing scene. I didn't have much to add. You all kind of touched on it in different ways, but pretty much all touching on the same points. Golden Company, of course, we all know, as LaDonna mentioned, as I think you mentioned, James, as well as MP, is that we know that they fight for this Aegon or fake Aegon character. I also wonder that, from my own take, is that if this indicates that Dany and her alleged nephew will enter into a conflict in the book series against one another potentially, if, of course, the Golden Company does stay aligned with Cersei in the show, if it even gets to that. On the other hand, you know, you guys mentioned the possibility that Dany is able to co-opt the Golden Company to fight on her side in some manner similar to the Second Sons. I would maybe think or presume. Anyway, I'm curious to see what happens there with that stuff. Another cracked pot point I had is that, and I have no solid theory for this or hypothesis for this, but what if things go awry between Cersei and Iron Bank, and the Iron Bank is somehow or eventually obliged to hire a faceless man to deal with Queen Cersei? I realize Arya no longer works for them, but it would be an interesting twist if she's somehow co-opted into dealing with them, as also given that they're the last members on her kill list, or Cersei's the last person on her kill list, really, after the Mountain. That's all.
Good stuff. I figured that one wouldn't take too long. All right. So, would y'all prefer I do Winterfell or we move to the battle? I know the battle is fucking huge. Vote for Winterfell.
Winterfell?
Okay. Vote for... Y'all prefer Winterfell. All right, let's do Winterfell first. So in Winterfell, y'all make sure I don't miss anything, but we get Arya's approach. No, we get Bran and Littlefinger, in which Bran is just so distant. He's disconnected. He's almost absent, but he's clearly listening. He's just listening. It seems like it's like he's listening to 18 different conversations at once, as connected to his attention is divided, and thus his emotions are divided amongst them all. But Littlefinger gives him the dagger, and one line after another tries to get sympathy from him, basically. Sorry to do the D. I'm doing my best to avoid D&D references, but it's like he's rolling persuasion over and over and over again, and can't gauge if he's getting any reaction. And then he says the chaos line, and goddamn, if that wasn't just a great fucking interaction. And then my mom goes, and then he nopes the fuck out. He's like, okay, oh, somebody's at the door. Guess I should leave. And then Mira shows up, and another important thing about the interaction between Littlefinger and Bran. Bran asks Littlefinger about the blade. Do you know whose this was? And Littlefinger says he doesn't, and that's the end of that mention. I don't think Bran would have asked him if Bran believed he knew, because Bran would know if he knew. And we've got a million different theories about that. You can watch our previous videos. Don't want to go into it too much. I think we should. I'm just going to avoid it. If we end up going into it, I'll give my opinion. But for now, it's irrelevant. But Littlefinger, I thought about this afterwards. Littlefinger says that he doesn't know whose dagger it was. He straight up told Cersei, or excuse me, Catelyn and Varys that he lost it in a bet to Tyrion. Now, maybe he found out that that wasn't true, which I don't think. I mean, I think we all know that's not true. In the books, we're told by both Tyrion and Jaime that Tyrion never bet against Jaime, ever. In the TV show, we're told it once. So... But maybe Littlefinger has found out that he was wrong, that somebody else did it, and he doesn't know who it was. But anyway, that seemed a little bit manipulative. So then we get the Mira scene. This is an incredibly important scene for two main reasons. One is because it totally shows how disconnected Bran is. We already got that impression, but this shows how disconnected he is, how incapable of empathizing. He said thank you. And the words were all expressing more would be emphasizing the thank you. He said thank you. He made his point. And then he says, I'm not Bran anymore. Not really. I'm Bran, but I'm also every moment, everywhere, ever. And she says you died in that cave. There's a couple of things I want to say about this. She says you died in that cave. This is one more instance of the direwolf dying alongside the human. It happened with Robb. It metaphorically happened with Sansa, because it's from then on that she begins to she's just disappointed with the situation she's in, despite it being given exactly what she wants. But you died in that cave anyway. So the other reason that scene is extremely important is because Mira says she's going to be with her family. So unless Mira's cut out, that means she's going to see either her dad, her mom, or other siblings. Now, she just may mean the Krennic men, but that sounds like she's going to Howland Reed, which of all the people that would be, that seems like the most likely candidate for a mystery charge near the end. And we're probably, the point of having the mystery charge during the Battle of Bastards, as far as foreshadowing, is A, to have one, and B, to know that there is not one coming. Because at the end of this, it's going to be everybody fighting, and we're going to know that there's literally no one coming to save us. This is it. But prior to that, Hal and Reed showing up with the Cranning Men would be a good final thing. That way we'd have everybody accounted for, even the fucking mystery people. So moving on from that, Arya shows up at Winterfell. We have that lovely shot of her on the cliff overlooking, which is the exact same cliff, it appears, that Sansa was on when she came with Littlefinger, but now it's completely snow. Those were, they're never going to get their credit, their due, but those were great actors, the people at the door. And they don't, it's really apparent that they don't want to let her in. And I loved Arya's slide when she tries to reach her, the mention of Roderick. I'm not gonna talk about it, but my mom made a great point about when she says which Lady Stark. When Arya says which Lady Stark, that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I interpreted it to mean she knows Jon's in charge. It could be Jon's wife if he had one, but y'all can talk about that. I'm just trying to push all the notes. We get the two guys that were guarding the door end up having to go to Sansa to explain that Arya has disappeared, or this girl has. They just do a wonderful job of relating, of doing the words. One guy stumbling over his words. It was really well done. It reminded me of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. No, I'm fucking that up. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Guildenstern. My mom will fucking correct me in a minute, or Charlie. But they did a great job of showing how intimidated they are by Sansa. They're extremely intimidated. They do not want to tell her this. And when they're back downstairs earlier, the bigger guy tells the skinnier guy, "You go tell Sansa, or I'll punch you in the face." Neither of them want to go see her. And she's got papers in front of her. She's learning how to rule. I mean, and she's taking it in stride. She wants to do it. I think that's awesome. But she goes down into the crypt. She meets Arya. They hug, but they don't hug at first. The first line is, "So am I supposed to call you Lady Stark?" And almost without a beat, Sansa goes, "Yes." So she's accepted that. And that is referenced, not referenced literally, but indirectly referenced later when Pod calls Brienne a lady. And she says, "I'm not a," thank you, Pod, because it's taking pride in being a lady. That's a wonderful thing. It's not that bad. It's not, me fighting does not make me not a lady, and prideful for that. So anyway, we get that interaction. There's a threefold circumstance with Sansa where first Arya tells her that she's going to kill a bunch of people, and Sansa and Arya end up laughing about it. Then we get the scene where Bran tells them both that Arya has a list, and suddenly Sansa's like, "Whoa, you were fucking serious?" And then we get the fight with Brienne. You talked about that. We talked about this. We get the fight with Brienne, which is the clincher for that, where Sansa, and we'll talk about this, I'll get to it in a minute, but Sansa's look is, I have got to reassess my understanding of who my sister is and what she's capable of. So anyway, they're in the cave and they have a cute little conversation. They hug. Ned's statue doesn't look like Ned. They needed somebody who looks like it. That's a beautiful line because it emphasizes that when we go to real places with real statues of real people that existed, William Wallace, there's a statue of William Wallace. That probably looks nothing fucking like William Wallace from Braveheart. But as far as I know, I don't know who fucking did the statue. It could have been his brother, which he didn't have. So then we get Sansa's like, "Hey, by the way, Bran's here." And they go to the weirwood tree, and it's as awkward as fucking ever. But Bran does kind of put an arm around Arya. I love that Sansa has just accepted that Bran has visions. Arya's like, "What the fuck?" And Sansa goes, he has visions. So okay. I saw you at the anyway, we get the list. We get the mention that Bran is literally watching everything that's going on right now. Arya gets handed the dagger. I'll let you express your excitement on that, and I'll piggyback on it. But and Bran's completely aware of his incapable nature is in his current physical form. It's no use to a cripple, and he hands it to her. Arya's like, "Are you sure it's Valyrian steel?" And he says, "Yeah." So I think that is it. No, and then it's the fucking awesome fight between Brienne and Arya. We also got the scene with Brienne and Pod watching Sansa and Arya and Bran go through Winterfell, and that was just a great scene. Because we get to feel through Brienne, not just our excitement that they're finally together, but we get to relive that through Brienne, seeing that they're finally together. Catelyn would be proud, I think is what Pod says, which is a beautiful thing. And then we get Pod and Brienne fighting. Brienne is giving him instructions, and although Pod looks like he's not learning, I guarantee you he's learning. The only way for him to learn is to fail, and that's what he seems to be doing over and over again. What I don't understand is the line where Brienne says something to the effect of, "If you really want to learn," and before she can finish it, Arya says, "Don't fight with her." And I don't really quite understand that line, and maybe y'all can help me out with that. But then Arya and Brienne have a fucking awesome fight. I could not be more happy with that choreography. Alizey looked it up, and that is Arya. That is Maisie Williams doing all of that. But just so in fights, it often looks like they're not. I mean, we forgive it and we ignore it. But if you go back and watch the scenes in the battles and stuff like that, when two people come at each other with swords, they're not coming right at somebody. They're like coming right above them, or they're coming where they're gonna miss, and it's practiced over and over, and the more they practice it, the better they get. But this scene looked fucking awesome. Arya is literally missing these shots by inches. And she flips the dagger from one hand to the other as Brienne grabs her hand, and they flip up. And then there's the scene where Brienne kicks Arya in the chest, and she goes flying back, and there's this, okay, can she actually handle this? And Arya flips back up and does the I just could not be more fucking happy. And this is also Arya's first chance to spar with somebody who is a Westerosi knight, and a woman. That's not quite true. There's the waif, but you're right. A Westerosi female knight. You're 100% right, Mama. But this is also her first chance to really spar with a Westerosi knight. And then we get the very important scene of Sansa responding to that situation with a concern, almost as if it's, what am I going to do with her? I don't understand her. I don't really know who she is, and I don't know what to do with her. I've got to run this place. Is she going to be a burden because she wants to fucking kill people if somebody shows up? And it's of note that she is asked, that Arya is asked by Sansa, who else is on your list? And Arya says, well, most of them are dead. Most of them are dead not because Arya killed them. She has killed some. I think she killed one, the guy in Bravos. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did she kill two? Y'all can help me with that. But Sansa thinks that means she's killed way more. But Arya is saying that to hide who she actually has on the list because she doesn't want to tell anybody. And I don't remember. I think Littlefinger's on the fucking list. It certainly will be once she finds out Littlefinger betrayed Ned. I got to stress what I mentioned last video that Alizey mentioned. I know we are all expecting Littlefinger to be killed, whether by Arya or Sansa or somebody else. I'm using D&D again, forgive me on that, but sometimes it's better to not kill the enemy, but to convince the enemy to fight on your behalf. If you can subjugate them, make them believe that they're powerless against you, then you may be better off just convincing them to fight for you. And Littlefinger may be just that, and that is Sansa's power. Sansa's power is in convincing people to being that person, and we haven't really seen it to the nth degree, but that's what she's good at. And I think it would make a whole lot more poetic sense. I know we expect Littlefinger to die, and we hope he's not here by the end. But what poetry if the destruction of Littlefinger comes not from his death, but from his control over him by Sansa. That was her idea, not mine. I think that's fucking awesome. I don't know if she holds to it, but we don't have to hold to it to have a theory. All right, so I hope y'all all got that shit and wrote some notes. Alizey.
Okay, where to start? First of all, I absolutely adored the scene between Arya and Brienne. It was almost like something out of fan fiction, but I still adored it. And I think the most important thing that came out of Arya getting that dagger is that she has Valyrian steel now. And we also see that she can very handily take on someone the size of Brienne, who is bigger than most men, bigger and stronger. And I mean, just as a parallel, we saw Brienne fighting Pod, and he was pretty weak against her. Granted, he's not the fighter that either of them are, but the average man is fighting more like Pod. And we saw that in the final battle at the end with the people running away. These men don't necessarily know how to fight, even if they're put in a situation where they have to. Which means that Arya, if she were to go north with Jon, would be a formidable force against the White Walkers with her Valyrian steel dagger. I'm just imagining her like taking out like 10 or 12 at one time, you know, like they're surrounding her. She just like whips around. She could do some really cool stuff because she has an advantage in that the way people train on the battlefield in Westeros is not intended to fight people like her. She's very short. She is very nimble. She fights like a rogue, and everyone else fights like a typical, you know, a fighter or a barbarian, going back to D&D here. She has like the advantage of stealth, and she has the advantage of dexterity, and that means that even though she's small and looks weak, she has a lot of potential on the battlefield. And with the Valyrian steel dagger, that means that now she has a weapon that can be used to kill anything from coming down from the wall. And I mean, we've seen like even Sam was able to kill a White Walker, and Sam isn't a fighter. He was still able to do it because he had an obsidian, he had the dragon glass. And I really think that we're going to see Arya go north. I think Jon won't necessarily let her, but when has that ever stopped Arya? She could easily take someone else's face in order to go up and fight with them, especially if Jon stresses to everyone around her that the fight is up there, and that's where it's important for her to go rather than to continue knocking people off her list of names, because everybody will be dead if they don't fight the White Walkers, and the people on her list will be gone anyway. I do think that she is going to kill Littlefinger, though, because maybe he wasn't on her list before, but the more she talks to Sansa, if she finds out that he sold her to Ramsay, I mean, that's enough of a reason right there. And then if Bran tells them about Littlefinger being the one that betrayed Ned, that is an ultimate reason for them to, you know, sentence him. And I think Arya will be the one to carry that out because she has the right. And she's also Sansa's not training, you know? She has much more fighting acumen than Sansa does. So even with Sansa as the leader, she wouldn't be the one to carry the sword the way Ned did when he was the leader. She would probably give that duty to someone else. And if Jon isn't back yet, she could give that to Arya. What else do I have to say? What else were we talking about here?
There was the Sansa and Arya in the cave, Bran and Littlefinger, Bran, Arya, and Sansa, and Arya and Brienne, and Arya's entrance.
I really liked the way that Littlefinger reacted to Bran and noped out, because that's basically what Sansa did when he told her about how he saw her wedding. She was just like, I have to go inside. And that's kind of how everyone's reacting to him. They don't know what to make of him. I don't think they really understand what he's capable of. And maybe we'll see more of that, where Bran will establish that he really can see everything. And the fact that they're still kind of treating him with kid gloves right now means that they're not really using him when he could be a very important player in the fight. They could ask him to see certain things and he could try and focus on it. Whereas right now he's just kind of in a trance. He's seeing everything at once. He doesn't know what to focus on yet. He still needs to train a little more to hone his powers. And he doesn't have necessarily a reason to yet because he hasn't been asked to look for specific things. I think we'll see more of that in this coming season. And that's all I got.
Good stuff. I agree with you. We're definitely going to get some more visions, but they're going to have a huge issue with that. In my mind, they're going to have a huge issue with that because everything from here on out, we hear or from Bran or see through his mind. It is a clear choice by the writers what they are giving us. So as opposed to it being a situation where you have Tyrion with, he doesn't have all the information, so we are limited in our perspective based on what Tyrion knows. Same thing with any of the other characters. Bran now knows so much that we can't really get his perspective because it will destroy everything. I mean, any secret, any question any of y'all have right now about the history, about who's doing what to who, Bran knows or could potentially. And so from here on out, it's really going to be difficult for the showrunners to do that in a way that doesn't feel like just a simple exposition, a simple explanation. I don't know the terminology for it, but a straight up, like what normal television shows do, where they just tell you what happened last episode from one character to another to remind you before something new happens in regard to it. I also wanted to say something I had not thought about. If Littlefinger is killed, we all expect, not all of us, there's kind of an expectation that Arya will be the one to do it. But you mentioned something that I think is extremely important. It would be such a benefit to Sansa's character arc, having been now basically leading Winterfell, if she were to find out what Littlefinger had done and she were to pass the sentence and swing the sword. I think that would really cinch her as, you know what? Why the fuck aren't Stark women just allowed to be in charge? That makes no sense. I mean, we already presume that, but the idea that they aren't capable of doing the things that men do. Like, I think most people, when asked, would expect that Sansa would not swing the sword, which is what you were kind of saying, that Arya would be the one tasked with that. But I'm not saying that that's what you're saying, but the idea would be that the idea that I think you expressed is that Sansa wouldn't do it. Regardless, I think Sansa doing it would be very powerful.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
Have you ever swung a sword? Because they're very heavy. Like, you have to train in order to successfully use it. I think it would be embarrassing for Sansa to never train and then try and execute someone and just kind of like, she doesn't have the strength. She doesn't know how to swing a sword yet. And Arya doing it doesn't take away from the fact that Stark women are in power. I
disagree, because that's kind of the point, that the man who passes the sentence must swing the sword. And there's a lot of other ways to kill people. You can kill them with a knife. I mean, Jon hung 4 or 5 people. He still used a sword to cut the road. My point is not that I'm right. My point is an argument that Sansa swinging the sword literally, but not necessarily with a Theon sort of hack. That there are alternatives. But Sansa doing it herself and the man who passes the sentence must swing the sword would work together if that were to happen.
But I don't think that makes Sansa's position weaker if she were to get Arya to do it.
I think it does, but I hear what you're saying. Mama?
Okay, can y'all hear me? Okay. I've got a lot to say about this, and I'm going to try to make it very short. The first thing I'm going to say to Alizey is I truly believe that I'm not saying you, but I've heard this argument about what Arya is going to do. I don't think that Arya's mission is to be in a huge war yet. She is a ninja. She is not going north. That is not what's going to happen. It's more important for her to be surreptitious about what she does. She's not a giant male warrior. So, and also, we've seen some previews. She's not going to be north. I'm going to back up now to the beginning of that scene. James, oh, you sweet summer birthday child. When Bran says to Littlefinger, do you know whose dagger this is? That was Bran testing his visions, in my opinion, because he knows whose dagger it was, but he wants to know if his vision was right, and if he's right, that Littlefinger is a fucking liar. So he asks the question. Littlefinger says, oh, I don't know. Okay. Now Bran sits back, and then he lets Littlefinger riff his Littlefinger stuff. And when he starts talking and says, oh, I'm so sorry you had to come back to this chaos, blah, blah, blah. And then Bran just, chaos is a ladder. So he confirms his visions. And then he says to Littlefinger, I know who the fuck you are. I thought that was brilliant filming. He did it on purpose to hear him lie so it would verify his own vision. And I loved it that he was testing himself. I love that. Whisper, and yeah, he noped the fuck out. Bran is getting so many things at one time. If you've ever seen that movie, it was something about God, or I think it was Jim Carrey as God, and he's watching all these messages come in on his computer saying, please help me, please help me. You know, Jesus Christ Superstar did this when people were saying, you know, can you help me, Lord? I can't see. Can you help me? And finally he says, I can't fucking help all of you. It's overload. Bran has got to learn how to take this overload. And he said it, I'm getting it in fragments. I've got to put it together. I thought it was heartbreaking when Mira said, you died in that cave. In the books, Bran actually tells Mira before he loses himself, I love you. He's just a little boy and she's older than he is, but he says, I love you. This thing where she says, I need to be with my family, harkened me back to Gendry saying, I've never had a family. I'm going to stay here. And Arya turns around and says to him, I can be your family. And she's about to cry, and Gendry chokes up too. And what Mira is saying to him is, please tell me, after all of our experiences, please tell me I'm your family. Please tell me you love me. Look at everything we've been through. Not I sacrifice for you, which is what she knee-jerks into, but tell me that you love me. And he says, I don't need you anymore. I thought that was fucking heartbreaking for both of them. It's such a disconnect, and he knows it. It's not like Bran is, and I watched a bunch of reactions that said, that's rude. It's not rude. Bran knows he's lost himself. He said, I remember Bran, but I'm not him, really. I just thought it was heartbreaking. And of course, it's going to send her back to her daddy. And then, you know, she says, you died in that cave. I'll remind everybody that when the guy, the assassin who came in to kill Bran, said to Catelyn, it's a mercy. He's dead already. Wondering if Bran didn't die in that fall. He died to a certain part of himself. And even Jaime and Cersei and Tyrion have that conversation at breakfast, saying it would be a mercy for him to die. So he is almost dead. And we have this throughout the series about dying and being resurrected and how far do you have to be gone. And if you're really far gone, can you ever come back? We'll see. Arya. That was a mirror of her when she came up to Winterfell. It was a mirror of her at King's Landing when she escaped down through the dragon dungeons with Illyrio and Varys and stuff, and everybody's getting killed later. Was a mirror of that, but it also was a mirror of her walking out of Harrenhal. This time she just walked the fuck in and disappeared because those guys were idiots. And James, perfect. Those guys were wonderful. They were the comic relief, and they were such great actors. Hope they get some kudos later. And when they brought up the, when Arya says, you know, go get Maester Lewin, go get Sir Roderick. And it's like, you know, at a certain point in life, you go in a place like me, I can go into my family's home. There's nobody left. Nobody left. And Arya's looking around and everybody is fucking foreign at Winterfell. It's her home. It's not really her home. She's not staying there. Sansa. James, you made a great point. We've talked about it. Those guys were terrified to go to Sansa and talk to her. She has distanced herself from everybody. She's doing her thing. People are afraid to go talk to her, which is perfect because like Dany, when she had 300 people waiting to come in to talk to her about their problems, Sansa's like, don't fucking bother me. I'm taking care of things. Perfect. She is the queen. Said this a long time. She is a queen. In the crypts, great scene. Loved it. I love the girls' reconciliation despite what they'd been through. I loved it when Arya said, we've been through a fucking lot, but we're still fucking here. Then they have, the key word is our story hasn't ended. And no, it hasn't. Not yet. But I also loved it when Sansa said, Bran's here too. And Arya was so happy. And then her face dropped when she saw Sansa's face because Bran's not their brother anymore. Fight between Brienne and Arya was wonderful. Wonderful. But it also, to me, the most important thing about that scene, other than it also referenced the Hound, who we're going to see next episode, in my opinion. But the thing that really, really got me was that as Sansa and her tick next to her, Littlefinger, Sansa's face fell when she was watching it. And James, I do agree with you in part, and partly I'll add this. I think that Sansa is a little disappointed that she doesn't have a superpower. She's not Bran, and she's not a super warrior like Arya. I think she's wondering, why did she survive? I mean, what is her place? And of course, we know it is because she's a little bird, which means singing, which means political persuasion. I don't think she's quite gotten her head wrapped around that yet. One of the most fascinating things, just a couple other things, I promise. One of the best lines that I really pricked my ears up on was that when Bran said a cripple doesn't need a Valyrian dagger. He didn't say Valyrian, but he gives it to Arya, which is clear foreshadowing. She's going to kill something White Walkerish. Not in a war, but she's going to kill something. But a cripple doesn't need a dagger. I think it means that Bran is never going to kill anything like a White Walker, because I think he might be part of those White Walkers. And also that, you know, basically Arya said, don't fight someone you can't beat. You know, don't. And Rickard Stark said, if you have to fight, win. Last thing, and I'll shut up, is that Arya is keeping her tick close to her right now because keep your enemies close.
All right. Charlie, you want to go next? I didn't know if you may have.
Yeah, I can go next. I mean, it's fine. I was gonna just say maybe for the last scene after this one, if I could go first after you as well, just so I get my thoughts out there and peace out. Absolutely. But yeah, I can give my thoughts right now if you like. Honestly, I think LaDonna really summarized the scene really, really well, so I have to give props to her on that. Maybe with the slight exception of that little jab towards Daenerys' leadership, but you know, it's all good. What do I have to add to this scene? Honestly, you guys have all kind of touched on the whole issue with Littlefinger, and I get why they're kind of playing that whole thing out. It's just, I find it frustrating that, and as much as I get that Bran is no longer truly Bran, and he is now the superhuman, partially divine being, it still bothers me that he doesn't just reveal to the other Starks what Littlefinger has done, especially to Ned Stark in the past. That's just one of my little, I guess, issues with the events at Winterfell. But again, you guys have all touched on that already. In terms of the Valyrian dagger and Arya, I think Tony actually made a theory about that sometime a while ago, that she would be killing a White Walker with that dagger. Or yeah, I could be wrong, but he at least mentioned it here. I remember in one of our videos a while back. So props to Tony on that one. Forgive me if I didn't hear you mention this, James, but I was more curious about your take on the exchange between Arya and Sansa on killing Joffrey. If you did talk on that, apologies. A little bit delirious here, but
I didn't.
I'm just curious. Okay, good. So I was wondering what if your opinion has changed on the matter with respect to, you know, the allegation that Sansa was one that killed Joffrey, or if maybe it made your belief in the matter stronger. Just curious on that. Yeah, that's basically all I have on this scene. Otherwise, you guys had terrific thoughts. So that's all.
All right, just to address what you were saying, I have to say that I have no choice but to treat that as solid evidence that she did not. I still hold out hope that we may find out that that's not the case, but the only way, in my opinion, that I could still be right is if Sansa is motivated to lie to Arya about it, and that doesn't seem likely. So I have trouble letting go of it because I really like the fucking theory. But this seems like solid evidence for me to just shut my fucking mouth about it until we either find out or don't find out anything else. Oh, and I did want to say another thing. Plexi Bertrand mentioned that in the books, Bran is in love with Mira, and that would make, in the TV show, it's not expressed that way. But in the books, he is literally like a little bit infatuated with her. That will be tragic too, or more so, because if he starts becoming detached, to know that he went from loving this person to not being able to feel that way because he's so detached. But Plexi Bertrand mentioned it in the books, he's in love with her. Also, Renee mentioned that the fencing instructor, I assume that's Renee M of House Stark, who's also a moderator, mentioned that the fencing instructor, I assume, that taught Arya how to fight, said Arya's sword is for stabbing, not slashing, despite how it's used in that fight. So thank y'all for that. All right, Maester Payne.
Hey, so I'm first going to give you a bunch of TeeBaby's notes here, just because she had a bit to say about Bran and Littlefinger. She feels like the scene between Arya and Sansa in the crypts, Bran wouldn't have actually been able to see that, which I think is actually a good point, and I kind of like that idea that you can't sort of see down into the crypts from a warging sort of perspective, or Bran sort of perspective. She wants to point out that we've never actually seen what happens to Bran when he wargs Hodor and Willis, and the fact that Bran might now be actually trapped inside the Three-Eyed Raven and somebody else is inside Bran, and that gives us this sort of idea that he's not relating to people anymore. I think that's what her point was there. And then arguments there was Mira's "you died in that cave" statement, and I would add also the Arya Brienne pod sort of thing, where don't follow where your enemy leads you. Bran was actually led to that cave, so there is, and we have a lot of aerial shots this season, which I think is actually Bran, sort of myself, flying around, and that's sort of his eye on things. She also says that Bran hesitates to give Arya the dagger, like he's seen what's going to happen in the future. So he's not quite sure that he wants her to do that, but I don't know. So I think that's it from TeeBaby, and I hope I did you justice. If I didn't, I apologize. There is a little mention here later on about Littlefinger and the ravens that she caught, which I also have, so I'll add into that with mine. Crap. I actually had a bunch of comments that I wanted to say to you guys too, which I thought everybody so far that spoke did a great job on the things that they were discussing. I wanted to point out that Bran, when he talks to Arya at the crossroads, doesn't see that she's going to Winterfell. He doesn't actually know which way she goes. So I think he could have figured it out, but he chose not to follow her. So he wasn't ever sure if she went to King's Landing or to Winterfell. I find it interesting that he pointed out the fact that he didn't know if she was coming to Winterfell. So my theory here about the cat's paw blade is that Bran sent it to kill himself because he doesn't want to have this experience. It's a little convoluted and it's still a work in progress, but this is for you. And then, by the way, Alizey, Littlefinger points it at himself when he passes it over, so the blade's actually pointed directly at him. So I think you guys are right. Arya will, now that she has it. But the other thing Bran says to Littlefinger is, do you know who this belongs to? My head, I don't think, well, I do think he's questioning for information to see what Littlefinger says, but I also think he's meaning originally, way back when we see it in the books of the Citadel, when we see the image that you showed the other time, James. And my theory, crackpot as it may be, is this blade is actually Lightbringer. Do you know who this belongs to, being, oh wow, this is that weapon? And Sam will maybe find that out at some point. Looks to me to be like obsidian and Valyrian steel, if that has any sort of meaning. And the things that Littlefinger says about this dagger, in a way, this is what made you who you are. So if Bran's doing this cyclical thing and he sends it back, hopefully hoping to kill himself perhaps, so that none of maybe the connection with the Night's King is never made, like he doesn't ever get marked by the Night's King, or he's trying to stop it before any of it happens. So I know that TeeBaby also said that there's a strong argument for it being Dark Sister, that that's why Arya has it. And also the chaos is a ladder speech. When Bran says it to Littlefinger, perhaps Littlefinger was actually, when he said it, was quoting something Bran told him in the past, because we have in this episode, the camera goes to Littlefinger and you hear ravens like chirping right beside him as he's watching Arya and Sansa down below. And anybody that's in chaos right now would be Bran. So chaos is a ladder, sounds like something he's figuring out. And we have Catelyn telling him, don't climb, Bran, don't climb. So there's another ladder reference right there. I feel like Bran can set plans in motion, but he can't guarantee the outcomes because there's always free will, as we all know. So trying to kill himself, the fact that Catelyn interrupts that, he couldn't change that sort of thing. And another thing for Greenseer type children, and Littlefinger possibly being one of them, he was a sickly kid when he was born. We have that with Sweet Robin, arguably he has it too. Bran himself and Jojen, they all have some sort of, you know, sickly aspect to them at one point when the Raven starts talking to him. In regards to Sansa and Arya, it was pointed out during our review that Bran never hugged Sansa when she hugged Bran, but he does hug Arya. Arya doesn't hug Sansa in the beginning, but then she hugs her secondly. And I think that actually has to mean something. And LaDonna, I believe you touched on what I'm getting at, is that I don't think Sansa has come into her power as of yet. She doesn't realize that she has it. It's there, but she doesn't know it yet. So she's actually a bit jealous of Jon, Arya, Bran. They all have these special gifts, but she's like, well, what do I have? But she will get there. And I think Littlefinger's actually playing off that aspect, which is another thing mentioned to me in our review, that he's making Sansa think that, oh, look at your brothers and sisters all have these special things, and that's what's going to get her to kind of go against them. But before that happens, Sansa will realize it and know who she is my thinking. what else do we have here? Mira says, my brother died for you. Hodor and Summer died for you. I almost died for you. Arguably, if we have this aspect that Bran was setting all these events in motion, these are people that he's slipped into at one point or another. Definitely Hodor, definitely Summer. Arguably, he sent Jojen up to him in the very beginning. And perhaps at one point or another, he tried to slip into Mira that we don't know about. I'm just throwing that out there. I have no actual proof. And another thing I want to say we didn't talk about earlier, and I should have mentioned it, it was another thing pointed out to me, but way back at the caves in Dragonstone, when Jon brings Dany down to the caves, it's kind of bringing her down to earth. Somebody said that to me, and I thought that was a really cool sort of aspect, because she's up in the clouds right now. Yeah, I think that's possibly it. I think chaos as a ladder is a big thing, and the fact that Bran said it to Littlefinger, I just feel like it looks to us like he's reading Littlefinger's mind, but maybe he was originally the one that gave Littlefinger that sort of feeling about what chaos can do. And that's all I got to say, guys. Sorry.
Awesome. And one thing to respond to what you said. It was my impression that what Bran was saying to Arya was that he saw her he was watching her, but that before she made her choice, he believed she was headed to King's Landing. I didn't get the impression that he wasn't sure where she ended up or where she ended up heading, but that clearly he knows now. I mean, at the moment that she is making that choice, I believe he's saying he thought she was going to head to King's Landing, but she chose to come to Winterfell, and which I think is a disagreement with what you were saying, but either way, I think you made a good point, because that's showing that Bran can't see the future. He can only see the present and the past. Because I didn't think about it this way, but the choice that she made is what created the future. And I'm getting rid of the idea that free will is not a real thing. Because in this show, it's got to be, there's apparent free will, and the future is dependent upon it. So Bran, that line by Bran is reinforcing that he can't actually see the future. The two exceptions to that in the TV show are that he sees a dragon flying over King's Landing, and he sees the explosion in the Sept of Baelor. I want to argue the timing does not work. Actually, it must have, because it was the same season. I'm going to make an argument that when Bran saw that explosion, he was seeing it happen simultaneously. Let me make that argument, that when he was there, that was happening simultaneously. I do want to also add that Plexi Bertrand mentioned that Scola Gladiatorial, and I'll try to find the video. Scola Gladiatorial was the one who talked about Arya's sword and how she fought, and Renee clarified that he's a professional historical fencing instructor and an antique sword fighter. He's not related to the show, but he spoke about it, and she wanted me to mention that Plexi Bertrand is Robert Sampier, who also mentioned the Bran and Mira thing. And just a shout out, I want to thank you, Alicia Kingston and Renee and with House Tar. Thank you both for moderating. I really do appreciate that. It helps me a lot. I did want to add one more thing. Bran died in a cave. A cave there is literally a cave in these books and show over and over again, but a cave metaphorically is literally part of the hero's journey. So is a death. A death is required and a cave is required. Not literally, but the metaphoric. And Bran had both happen to him in that cave. Jon has had both. Dany's had several deaths. She survived. So, all right, Niko.
How much I love you guys. Sometimes I think about, like, I'm really happy and I feel lucky to be here with you and discuss. So let's do this. If you guys who are watching stayed with us the previous episode, the small council seating about the previous episode, you might remember how LaDonna closed it with a really nice talk about people who went through shit, through war, and how you don't talk about it. And then we get at this episode, like, you have the reunion between Sansa and Arya, and like, hey, how you been? You know, I've seen stuff, but I'm not gonna talk about it. I think it was perfect. I mean, LaDonna, come on, you just made such great points, and yeah, we actually saw it on screen. Now, Bran and Mira, I cannot add anything, and I completely agree with what LaDonna said. It was heartbreaking, but this is how it is. When you have so much knowledge as Bran, you know, like, he has no time to deal with this earthly, whatever, low human things like, you know, feelings or emotions. He has stuff to do. In regards to free will talk that James always talks about, and I really like, I'm just gonna pull a reference, and I think a lot of you will know what I'm talking about. I'm a pickle, but when I choose to be. It's from something that I really like to watch. Now, Bran and Littlefinger scene. Now, this is how I saw it. I'm not saying that I'm right, but previous episode, you get Littlefinger saying to Sansa, like, teaching her, oh, you have to do this, you know, like, this is how you do it. You become friends with everyone, but, you know, like, you manipulate them. And then he starts doing that with Bran. And Bran's just like listening, yeah, what a bunch of bollocks. And instead of saying, you know, like, man, you're so full of shit, he just says, chaos is a letter, end of story. So this is how I saw it. And of course, Littlefinger is afraid because he knows, and like, we know exactly, exactly, James.
Boom! Big reveal. I'm a pickle. What do you think about that? I turned myself into a pickle. I'm Pickle Rich.
That was a fucking episode. That was so good. I'm a pickle when I choose to be. Come on, James, tell me, that scene with the psychiatrist, that was so good.
I'm not up to date on the show. I just wanted to put that up there too.
You should watch it. It's amazing. So, where was I? Yeah, Littlefinger knows that people who know a lot of stuff are dangerous. So he's obviously afraid, but he tried to manipulate Bran. That's not gonna work. I don't know if he's gonna try to manipulate Arya. He's gonna get it from the Starks. I think that Arya is gonna kill him because she was handing the dagger, right? But am I right? Bran gave it to her. So, but he's gonna probably be judged by all Starks because so many times, so he has to them. I see how what's James saying, that Sansa should be the one, but I think that Arya is gonna. I don't know who. Whatever. What the fuck did I write here? Yes, I agree that it was the mirroring of Arya entering King's Landing. Now I definitely saw what James, and that's why I love you, James. The book that I'm holding, can you read it? Yes, it's a play, so definitely Two Gods.
Too.
The best play in the world, and one of the best movies ever made. So guys, go watch Tom Stoppard's movie, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead.
Hey, I want to thank you for doing that. And if you would mention, it's from Hamlet, but it takes two characters out of it and gives them a backstory.
Exactly. But in Hamlet, they were guiding Hamlet, so like, it's so good. I mean, I saw it like that. It's so good. Guys, read this play or watch a movie. The tennis scene, so good. So, what else do I have to say? Of course, I'm gonna save the best for last. Arya. The way I saw this scene, I mean, I love Jaime because I'm a horny dog, but that, it's not important. What really melted my heart was Arya, and I saw it like she's still a child. Like when child learns something, the child wants to show it to you, and she was like, look what I know with the sword. And this is how I saw it. It was so innocent in a way, and it was so good. Thank you for listening to me. I'm not gonna add anything.
Lovely. Thank you, Niko. All right. Charlie is about to pass the fuck out. So let me go ahead and jump to the next thing and get him to talk about it. Charlie, why don't you go ahead and jump straight into the battle stuff so you can give your spiel on it.
It's no rush. You can, if you want to give the rundown of the scene, you can. My only comments on that scene actually were references to historical events in Westeros. So that's all I was going to say on the matter.
Got it. Okay. So we get a shot earlier after closer to High Garden of Jaime and Bronn loading up the caravan with the gold. Bronn is handed a thing of money and says basically, thanks. You owe me a castle and a girl. Did you forget about that? Jaime says, I just gave you fucking money. And Bronn's like, yeah, but you promised a castle and a girl, and that's what I like. So Jaime's being really glum about something, and I think that this is extremely important. I think we're all assuming, and not all of us clearly, but I think most people are assuming he's upset because of the Joffrey. He's not upset because of the Joffrey. He's upset because Olenna is making him question Cersei. There is no other possibility. That is why he's so glum. I mean, clearly the prospect of war is on him, but he didn't seem that burdened with High Garden. It's the fact that Olenna is making him question Cersei. And the fire of this scene is gonna bring that to fruition once we get a conversation between Jaime and Cersei about what she did at the Sept, which hasn't happened yet. So Bronn mentions that he wants a castle. He mentions High Garden. Jaime says, you don't really want High Garden. It's too big. It's a burden. And Bronn says, yes, I fucking do. So anyway, that's pretty much that scene. We see the gold. Next scene we get of them, we get Randyll Tarly coming up to tell Jaime the gold has made it to King's Landing. There are stragglers at the end of the caravan, and I suggest we flog them in order to motivate them to go faster. Jaime, showing that he's a good guy, says, let's give them a warning first. Randyll shows disgust at that, and even Bronn is like, what the fuck, man? So Jaime and Bronn go up to, they talk a little bit back and forth, but they go up to talk to Dickon, and they ask him what was fighting in High Garden like. I just said hard on because it's Dickon. So they go to ask him what the fight at High Garden was like, and he says it was glorious. And they're like, no, seriously, what the fuck, man? Your dad's not here. And he says, I knew some of those men. I knew some of those men. I grew up with them. I think that, to cut to the chase, Dickon is a good fucking dude. I know that we can't count on any good dudes surviving, but we're at the point where if we continue down this path, there's just not going to be anybody left. So I would like to propose that if Dickon survives, Randyll Tarly has been told he may get High Garden. Jaime said, I will vie for you getting High Garden if you support us. If Randyll Tarly were to get High Garden and die, Dickon gets it. The Citadel and getting High Garden means you're in control of the Reach. The Citadel is in Old Town, which is in the Reach. Wouldn't it be awesome if Dickon was in charge of the Reach and High Garden? And what a good dude. He saved Jaime. He's a good guy. He doesn't like, he's a fighter. Dude, that guy's fucking biceps are bigger than his fucking legs. It's insane. But he also shows a good amount of concern over the unnecessary death of others. He doesn't have his dad's harshness, which we saw earlier when he was played by a different character. But anyway, I think that's important. And if Sam ends up becoming Archmaester, or is that what's called? Grandmaster. It's the Grandmaster, I believe. I was wrong. My fault. That's a good combination of those two. And I mentioned in the last video the possibility that Bronn marries Sam's sister, but that would have to be congenial, voluntary on both of their parts. Anyway, so back to the chase. Jaime and Bronn are talking with Dickon when Jaime says, or Bronn says, do you hear that? And what a perfect situation, because Bronn would be the one to hear that, having been in more of a mercenary sort of situation. He would be the one to notice that. But so there's a lot that happens in this scene. I want to mention a couple of major things, but I have a feeling we're all going to have different stuff to say about this because there's just a whole lot packed into this. It goes without saying that this was beautiful, but I can't express how beautiful I found this. It was emotional for so many different reasons. And I think the key to it all comes down to pulling for Dany over Cersei, understanding the need to fight. It's a war. That's what happens. But also seeing the horror of it and seeing it through Jaime's eyes, who literally killed the king because the king wanted to burn people to death. Jaime deserves a fucking Emmy for this episode. That entire fight, you don't hear a goddamn word from him with the exception of him yelling shields and spears and then his short conversation with Bronn. But you get all this emotion from him. I thought it was fucking incredible. He sees the carriage on fire with the horses running from it, which I swear to God is in a poem, but I cannot find it. He then sees people burning to death, tossing themselves into the water in order to save themselves from drowning. From burning to death. He sees somebody pull their mask off, and they've got burn scars. So, okay, so what if they live? Their lives are altered immeasurably, almost arguable that death would be better considering how likely they're going to be in pain the rest of their lives if they survive. And then he sees these people literally turn to ash in front of him. He's unable to look at it. He has the horror on his face was just fucking pure and perfect. And it was in steps. It wasn't just like horror. It was horror, disgust, fear. It was all these different emotions, one after the other, and dependent upon the scene that he was looking at. But the moral ambiguity of Jaime versus Dany in this scene made it so fucking powerful. Because when the Dothraki crest that hill, by the way, Nerd Writer has a great video about all the things that went into this particular episode, the battle scene. But when the Dothraki crest that hill, you're like, fuck yeah. But you also simultaneously think, oh, I would be scared fucking shitless if I was on the other side. And Bronn says, you need to get the fuck out of here. And he says, I gotta stay here. And Bronn says, those motherfuckers are about to swamp us. You need to get back to King's Landing. And Jaime says, we can hold it. And then the fucking dragon appears. Like, there was almost no hope before the dragon got there, and then the dragon gets there. I wanted to stress that Dany looks like a vampire queen in this. If you go back and watch where she is backlit by the dragon, when the dragon has landed and she's backlit by this black and red dragon, and she's got a black outfit on with the silver down here, and she looks back at Jaime, she looks like a vampire queen. It could not be more akin to a vampire queen. How fucking brave of Jaime. How fucking brave of Jaime. And I thought he was good. Y'all know I predicted that he would be jousting the dragon. He was going for Dany in that scene. He was trying to kill Dany. And he would have fucking died had he done it. He knew that. I'm of the opinion that was Bronn that dove in and got him. A lot of people weren't sure, but that was Bronn. He sunk because of his armor, which is a real fucking thing. That armor is heavy as shit. But I don't think he's dead. I just want to say that. I don't think he's dead. We're going to get him out. Likely the dragon will get him out. And I mentioned last episode that I thought he was going to be captured. I just wanted to show this to everybody because somebody mentioned online and made this that it seemed like justice that he fell into the water, similar to how he had tossed Bran out the fucking window. And look at the dichotomy. One's in air, one's in water. The scene from Jaime is above. The scene from Bran is below. This is just a good point and beautiful. And oh my God, it was so beautiful. Him in that water dropping down so slowly but inevitably. And they showed the bottom and how deep. God damn, these people are good. And the dragon, there was a weight to the dragon, a reality to the dragon. And they even made a point of shooting arrows at the dragon, and it gets blocked by the armor on the chest. They had the beautiful scene of the dragon going over the water for a return trip. So imagine how far he goes before he turns around and comes back. Because turning would be the part he'd be most vulnerable. So I would imagine he'd go pretty far. And they had the tree get sideswiped and rustle in response. Bronn had such a fucking awesome arc. If I was talking to my mom about it, if I were Bronn and I was reading that in the script, how fucking awesome is that? One beautiful thing that happened was when Bronn is riding against that Dothraki rider, Bronn, we already saw the scene where he in a couple episodes back, seasons back, where he throws the dagger at the Dornish guy and gets him in the neck to kill one before they fight. And Bronn's known for not quite using the same rules as the other fighters. This was the perfect example of the alternative happening. He is not used to fighting Dothrakis. No one is. And Robert Baratheon straight up said, it's impossible to fight a Dothraki on an open fucking field. And that is literally what happened to them. And add a dragon to it, the field of fire. You have nowhere to go. Nowhere to go. And if they hadn't had a siege weapon, there literally would be nothing they could do. And oh my God, those Dothraki fucking riders jumping from their horses over, getting up on their horses and shooting with arrows. That's a real thing. The fucking Mongols did that shit. So much to say about this. I know there's way too much. But Bronn had such an epic, it was a one-shot of him going back and forth and trying to fight. He knocks a guy that's burning away from him. A horse almost runs into him. He has to pull a sword out of a dead guy, which didn't quite make much sense to me because that was a knight's sword in a knight. Not a anyway, but that's fucking irrelevant. So, and then he ends up at the tent with the scorpion or ballista. I believe that it's called either, but it was referred to as a scorpion in this. And he misses the dragon, but he ends up shooting it. I think we all thought the dragon was going to get it in the mouth. That was what it looked like was going to fucking happen. But he got it in the shoulder. Dany tries to pull it out. She is not going to be able to get that out. It's barbed. It's got like 6 barbs, 3 on each side. And those barbs are in there. She can't pull it out without fucking him up. So this is exactly why Jaime killed the Mad King. The horror of, it's one thing to sentence somebody to death. That alone is a really morally ambiguous thing. To fight over power is another morally ambiguous thing. A lot of people think they're better rulers. Some don't know that they wouldn't be good rulers, but want to be the ruler. Some think that they'll be the best, and they end up being faulty. Even if you're the best ruler, do you really have the right to say it's mine? And that goes back to how do we decide who's in charge? But fire, of all things, for that to be the way to kill people. And that's what Jaime literally watched with the Mad King, not just the potential of it, but with what the Mad King did to Ned's dad. And apparently Ned's brother, as far as the TV show is concerned. That's the way it was written. So again, there's so much. I fucking loved the carriage on fire, the horses running. Dickon did a great fucking job. That actor did a great job. I'm just going through all the shit I wrote here, making sure I made all the points I wanted to make. The food was destroyed in that battle. I think that made a lot of sense because if Dany did not win that battle, she needed to destroy the food so it wouldn't reach King's Landing. That said, now she can't take the food. But regardless of all that, Cersei is not getting that food. So now she's going to give all her money to the Iron Bank. Her fucking soldiers have all died. I mean, she just lost her entire army almost, with the exception of those at King's Landing. She has no money. She has no army. Imagine what the Iron Bank's going to do when they find that shit out. And her brother, her closest advisor, only advisor other than Qyburn, is gone. And she has no food to feed the people. Those people are not going to be happy with her at all. And this is exactly what we saw previously with the riots at King's Landing that ended up with Joffrey getting in trouble. This is the time for Littlefinger to go down there. If Littlefinger's going to play this game, this is the time for him to go down there. I don't know if that's going to happen, but and Tyrion also mentioned that they were planning a blockade of the Blackwater Bay to keep food from getting in there. So they're already considering that. So Cersei's in a very bad place. there's so much to say. One last thing before we move on. Alizey will be next. Despite the moral ambiguity and watching all these soldiers fight and the moment that we're in, on top of that was this feeling of, for me, of look at all these soldiers. Look at all these Dothraki screamers on horses. Look at all these Lannister men with swords and shields. What a waste. None of them are going to fight the Night's King's battle, or at least not half of them. They're all going to be fucking dead. What a waste. And we've been watching this book after book, season after season, which is the point I mentioned to her. She knows this, but I'm comparing it to the squid in the Watchmen series. If you can unite the world against a foreign threat, make the world believe that it has to work together. It's like humans need an enemy. And if you can make that enemy something else, and make humans believe they need to work together to fight, that's how you get humans to work together. All right, that was a long discussion, and I'm sure there's more I fucking missed. Alizey.
I'm going to go back a little bit, because there is a point that I'd like to make to Maester Payne about Lightbringer. I don't think that dagger is going to be Lightbringer. I think we are going to see it. And I know we're going to see Gendry again in this series. In this season, I mean. And kind of my theory there is that Gendry has been working under basically the only blacksmith in King's Landing who knows how to reforge Valyrian steel, because he turned ice into Widow's Wail and Oathkeeper. So Gendry knows how to do that. Ostensibly, Valyrian steel is made out of dragon glass and steel. Because it has the properties of dragon glass, which means that if they get all that dragon glass from Dragonstone, they're going to need somebody who knows how to forge it into weapons. And I think Gendry is going to be the one that creates Lightbringer. I don't know if we're going to see a literal retelling of the story where it has to be plunged into someone's heart for it to turn red. I think that's metaphorical, but I think we are going to see Jon, or, we're going to see a Lightbringer be crafted. And it's going to be the first time Valyrian steel has been made in a long time, because Gendry, that could be his role to play in that's his strength, and I think he would be very useful if they use him for that. And now to go back to that battle. So as soon as the battle started, I was very excited because we finally get to see the Field of Fire. We get to see Daenerys kicking ass on a dragon. But the more I watched it, the worse I felt for the Lannisters. And I never thought I would ever feel bad for Lannisters. Daenerys coming in with her dragon is kind of like an F-16 or a drone attacking peasants in the Middle East, It's unfair in a sense. There's no way to really fight back against that. And I really felt for the soldiers, because you see them running away. They're trying to get out of that battlefield as soon as they can. They don't want to be fighting. And Daenerys doesn't care anymore. She doesn't care. I mean, the people fighting in the war, yes, they're soldiers. Yes, this is war. Yes, this is what happens. But they're still the common people. And Daenerys claims to be the champion of the common people. And here she is roasting people who are running away from her. And that just kind of makes her character more of a morally gray area, I think, and it's very interesting. So basically, I liked Daenerys a little bit less in this episode. And in the preview, in the trailer for the next episode, we see her saying, bend the knee or die, which is, it goes against my theory before, where I thought that Jon would convince her to send these people to the wall. And maybe that could still happen after they find out that she's, executed a lot of people. I still think that it would be poetic justice for Sam's dad and brother to be sent to the wall. And I still hope that happens. It's less likely now because Daenerys seems to be in a blood rage. She's out for blood. She wants to kill everyone who stands in her way. And yes, it's war. Yes, that's how you seize power. But this is an invasion. It's absolutely what Cersei claimed it would be, which kind of levels the moral playing field there. Because before, personally, I thought that, because Daenerys wants to free the slaves, she's going to help the people and she will be a better ruler than Cersei. I never thought that I would agree with Cersei that the dragons and the Dothraki army are actually quite a big threat to Westeros, but not as big as the threat of the White Walkers, which will kill everyone and turn them into whites. So I just think that what Daenerys is doing is a child's game in a sense. She's looking for power and that's all she cares about. She wants to become queen when there's a real threat to the north. And she's going to have to realize that it's going to require banding together as humanity to survive, for anybody to survive. And I guess my issue isn't with Daenerys telling people to bend the knee. It's her telling them to bend the knee or die, like there's no other recourse. And furthermore, I take issue with, well, she had no idea what was in those caravans. She probably thought that was the gold. But what she hit, what she hit with the Dragonfire was the food. So now this is another big issue that's going to affect all of Westeros for a long time because all the food in Westeros was in Highgarden. And it wasn't just the food in Highgarden, it was the food of all the bannermen that was being taken back to King's Landing, and now that's gone. So all these armies are going to starve. That's just going to be a more interesting scenario as time goes on, because whoever does win is going to have to deal with all of that. And if Daenerys wins, and there's no food because she destroyed it, she's going to have to deal with that. That's all I got.
Got lot to pull apart there, or to discuss there. You mentioned Valyrian steel and dragonglass. I think my mom and I are of the opinion that it's a werewood in there, so we don't quite know what's in there. But definitely, I agree that Gendry's going to be doing it. And I think that you are completely correct that the moral question with Dany is, where is she drawing the line? She says bend the knee or die in the next episode. Missandei is under the belief that if she were to ask Dany to leave, she would be allowed to. And Davos and Jon question that, which leads to, in my opinion, what Jon is going to be faced with near the end of this, when he believes that the White Walkers are offering eternal peace in the absence of free will if you join them. If Jon were to know that, if any king were to know that, going to fight a battle you know that you're likely to lose, and the enemy tells you, if you give up your people, I won't kill a single one. In fact, I'll give them immortality if they agree to give up free will. Then does the king go back and offer this to his people? Tell them, you have a choice. You can fight with me or you can go to the other side. Or does he not tell them and says, I'm making this choice for them? That's a huge question that I think would need to be answered. Do you dupe them in order to fight for what you believe is right, or do you tell them the truth so they can choose for themselves and open the door to let them fight? It's like somebody going to fight for ISIS, and then when it's over, like an American going to fight for ISIS, and then when it's over, there's the idea of whether you can recoup somebody who believes something truly, and they're unwilling to be convinced otherwise. But if we were in America and a guy came up to the government and said, I would like to fight for ISIS, may I leave? You're not going to get fucking, you're not going to go, you're going to go to a mental health ward, or you're going to go to jail. So there is no good answer to that question. And the winners write the history books. As regards Dany and what you were talking about, I I see what y'all are saying, that fire is a horrible thing. So is plunging a sword into somebody. So is cutting off their arm and making them live their entire life without it. I cannot debate that, and I'm not trying. Despite my argumentative, the way I sound, this is just a disagreement. None of us has any answers, and it's the point of disagreeing that we do this in the first place. So, but Dany killed the slavers at Meereen. She killed the masters and was told that she had killed some that were innocent, including his daughter Loric's dad. She killed the masked men. What the hell were they called? The masked men in Meereen with the horns. What the hell are they called? The Harpy, Sons of the Harpy.
So, yeah.
She killed the Sons of the Harpy. Arguably, they just didn't want a foreign queen. I mean, they wanted their own kind of freedom, a democracy in a way. She also killed the soldier. So to me, this moral ambiguity has been building up, and to call it now solely because we've seen the horror of the fire, this is not the line, in my opinion. Although I see what you're saying, I think it's a combination. I think I understand that it's a combination of the horror of the fire and her demanding that Jon kneel. Those two things combined seem to be where it's coming from. We'll wrap it all back around once we're done with this. Charlie.
There we go. Well, first thing I gotta say is I really had such a dick on for this scene. Daenerys truly kicked butt, I gotta say. Loved seeing the dragons finally in action. I think seeing that really made me wish or hope that we get a Dance of the Dragons miniseries or a spin-off at some point, because having dragons fight humans is one thing, but dragon versus dragon warfare would be epic, and I really hope we get that in some large-scale manner. And I think that would be the perfect way to have it, actually. To respond to something James said earlier, I still think Sam will inherit Hornhill rather than... and as a result, I think he'll inherit the Reach as a whole in the TV series. However, I think it would be kind of crazy if Sam's inheritance ends up passing to Craster's son by Gilly. Just some food for thought there if that does come to pass. Interesting twist, anyway. James, you mentioned the Mongols attacking and their battle tactics being similar to the Dothraki. I totally agree. I think the Dothraki scene really gave me a tease as to what Europeans must have felt when the Mongols reached Eastern Europe, or even, the Huns reaching Europe as a whole 1,000 years prior to that, or so. They just didn't know what hit them. It was like this insane thing that they had never seen before, just coming to exact vengeance against them. There was this whole narrative with respect to, I think it was the Mongols, that the Mongols were sent by God to punish the Europeans or people of whatever states that were invaded at the time. I think that was the narrative for the Kievan Principalities, so like basically Russia at the time. Anyway, I digress. Again, I think it was an epic battle. It threw back to a few things. I will say, though, just on one thing, that keep in mind that the Lannister soldiers that Daenerys was attacking, they weren't, necessarily innocent, helpless peasants. These are the same soldiers who did sack Highgarden and killed its army. So I don't think it's fair to say they're any more innocent than Daenerys per se, but that's just my 2 cents on that matter. Right, now the throwbacks I wanted to mention. So I mentioned the Dance of the Dragons earlier being an epic, mini-series or spin-off. I think that was one throwback that was and whether intentionally or not, it was kind of shown this episode, was the fact that Lord Tarly was fighting, for Queen Cersei's cause against Daenerys. Well, in fact, in the Dance of the Dragons, there was a Lord Tarly at the time who was fighting for Rhaenyra Targaryen, who was one of the two claimants to the throne at the time. And he was winning a battle for her against the Greens, the Green Army, the opposing army, and it was going really well up until one of the Green princesses showed up with his dragon and basically just wrecked the Tarly forces in that battle and effectively made him their prisoner. Kind of happened in this case as well, where the Tarlys were doing really well in their battle against the Tyrells, sorry, as well as their mission to get all the grain back to King's Landing. Of course, that failed right when the dragon showed up. So I thought it was kind of a mirroring that happened there. and it's a little hint at my next video that I'm going to be putting up on my own channel. Sorry guys, I just can't talk right now. Second one was, it was also a mirroring of yet again an event during Aegon's conquest of Westeros at the Fields of Fire, when Aegon defeated both the Garner Kings and the Lannisters at the time. I think it's interesting to note that it was that battle that brought about the extinction of the Garners, whereas in the show, House Tyrell has been effectively wiped out just one episode prior to this one with Lyanna's death. So I thought that was kind of an interesting parallel there in a way. And it kind of reinforces the conqueror aspect of Daenerys with respect to her ancestor. I have to be honest, I did not come up with that second comparison on my own. It was on I think it was an Instagram account by the name of GOT True Fact. So I just want to mention that out of fairness to my source before I, claim it as my own. Otherwise, I think that's all I have for that scene. Again, it was epic. At the end my one question though was that at the end was it Bronn who saved Jaime by pushing him in the water, or because it didn't seem that clear to me. I think it was Bronn though. Yeah. Anyway, that's all. I'll hear a few of your thoughts. I'm going to have to head offline soon because I'm half awake right now.
I think it was Bronn. I think we've rewatched it a boatload of times. I don't think there's definitive evidence, but she mentioned that it looked like he had fingerless gloves on.
Light armor.
And light armor, and I agree with the light armor. Plus, if you rewatch this, the last scene we see of Bronn before that moment is Bronn on the ground with the fire going over him, and him looking up and seeing a horse without a rider. And that looks like the horse that ran into Jaime. All right, Mama Gemma.
All right, folks, I'm going to approach this as the elder in the group, because I am. I've seen a lot of war, not that I've been in them, but I've seen it over and over. I'm 60. You guys are younger. Not that that makes me more wonderful, but I'm going to approach it with some age, and I might die. I'm getting older. So let me say this about this scene. Everything you guys have talked about is absolutely in the show. Martin is about my age. He's a little older. If I have to look at it from an elderly person's perspective, and no, I'm not on my deathbed, what I am seeing is, God fucking damn it, can't we form a Star Trek Federation? And I'm not kidding. I'm not joking when I say this. Why do we even have to rehash this? Why do we constantly in our world and in these books, and Martin is talking about it, why do we constantly have to rehash all of these perspectives? Why do we constantly have to rehash ego and power and what we want? Why can we not goddamn pull fucking together? And that is what this book's about. At the end, there will be either a great pulling together or a fucking tragedy for this planet. And I really believe that is the key concept. And I am going to go to my grave, and James and I have talked about it. James says, don't you think there will be a better end? And I went, not in our lifetime. And no, there won't. And that's why we're still talking about it. And maybe by talking about it, and maybe by millions of people watching this show, which I think is going to be an epic cultural event for our planet, that people will pull together and say, why can't we fucking do better than this? Why do we have to get caught up in these tiny battles and pull together against global warming, global icing, whatever is threatening our planet? Now, I'm going to get off of that, but I really want to say that because I don't know how much longer I'll live. And I think that's true. If I have to get into the personal aspects of this episode, which they were magnificent. You guys know, if you've been watching me for years, I love the Hound and Sansa story. But my favorite character in all of these books is Jaime. Jaime is a fucking hero. He has some real flaws, and we know what they are, and Cersei has manipulated him into it. But Jaime is a goddamn hero. And I am not sure that James, don't argue with me. I don't know if there will really be an Azor Ahai. It's a mythological figure. But if there is anyone that really, really, truly fits it, I think it might be Jaime. There are visions of Bran who talk about something golden coming from the sky, and Jaime says, there is no one like me, only me. I think Jaime is the most complex character in these novels. Back to the scene. I think it was important that we got perspectivism from somebody else other than Dany coming in on the dragon, which was fucking magnificent. But we got it from the people we love. Jaime, Bronn, even Tyrion comes up on that cliff, and he is viewing what he considers a civil war. That is his brother down there. And what does he say? Flee, you idiot, which is a callback to Gandalf in Lord of the Rings saying, fly, you fools. And what does Jaime do? He tries to cut off the head of the Hydra. He grabs a spear and in a jousting episode tries and kills Dany. And she's gorgeous. And that was a callback from the fighting pits where she's trying to get the spear out of Drogon. And of course, he's almost there. And then the dragon comes around. I truly believe that Jaime is a Targ. It doesn't matter. It doesn't fucking matter. What matters is what a goddamn hero. And he has tried desperately to not end up this way in a field of fire. He killed Aerys to stop the shit. He is a balanced person if he can get away from Cersei. And I think he might be captured. And if he is captured, then I think he might end up on that island with Dany. And I hope they have some conversations. Now, getting back to the interpersonal battles and all that shit that doesn't really matter in the end, I will say this. Dickon was awesome. I loved the recasting of him. I thought he was brilliant. I disagree with James. I think narratively, it makes sense that Dickon dies. Because then Randall is faced, Randall Tarly, the father of Dickon and Sam, Randall is faced with having a weakling as an heir to his throne. And it's a tragedy. It really is a fucking tragedy, which is what Martin does. With respect to the scene with Bronn heading towards that Dothraki against him when he throws the sword, his dagger, I thought that was kind of a throwback to Jorah throwing sand against a Dothraki in the Vas Dothrak. And the Dothraki just kind of does that, and the cutting off of the horse's leg. And then we have the conflict between whether or not Bronn is going to go for the gold or go for his life. And of course he chooses fucking life, wouldn't you? Again, getting back to the microcosm, when Bronn, God bless Bronn, I fucking love him. When he gets a hold of the ballista and he is staring down the sight, it's almost like that scene in Jaws where Chief Brody is looking down the sight at Jaws as he comes up, and he says, "Die, you son of a bitch," and he says almost the same thing. I thought it was fucking brilliant. I mean, I'm just getting waves of cinema, and they put that in for a reason, folks. They certainly did. I'm going to go back to Jaime. You know, Jaime said, "I'm not leaving my men." He is a brave man.
Mama, let me cut you off for 2 seconds. I think Charlie's about to head out. Charlie, you there?
Yep, I'm here. I'm just about to go to bed.
Okay. I love you. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me, folks. Good night. Sorry I have to peace out.
No, you're fine.
The rest of the show.
Thank you for sticking it out. You're the best.
No worries. Thank you guys for having me as always. Good night.
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 Good
All right, go for it, Mom.
With respect to Bran and your concept about him ending up with Sam's sister, that might happen. I don't know. You know, you want a good girl, but you need a bad pussy. That bad pussy's dead. And Bran has already given up. He's given up the gold. He already said he's at the end of his life. He may very well end up with her. I don't know. I don't care. This is a bigger fucking picture. I love the fact that Bran ended up being in a field of fire where he actually saved the Hound from a field of fire. But again, the bottom line in this is that Jaime is a motherfucker and a brilliant, complex character. And if I might, he may be resurrected in a way because he just died amongst salt and fire. He just plunged himself into an ocean. James, don't argue with me. Blackwater Rush is a brackish water. And he may end up being very, very much possible to be Azor Ahai. I think there's a bunch of Azor Ahais. I think it is a hero's journey. But I am with this. Nikolai Coster-Waldau is a fantastic actor. I loved it. And I'll say some things that were in the chat. Honor is a horse. And he said, come on, boy, let's go do this. And he lost his horse.
That's a great fucking point. I did not connect. If that, in the books, he has a horse that is his horse and its name is Honor. If that is his horse, it died. Wow. That was good, Mama. You mentioned that Jaime is your favorite character. Jaime and the Hound are my favorite characters. But if I had to choose one to be, I'd pick Bronn. If I could pluck Bronn, if I could be Bronn in this world, Bronn's cool as fuck. So I gotta retort for a split second before moving on. You say Jaime's a hero, but if you're reading the comments, you gotta consider, and I'm with you, Niko, because Niko responded with a perfect response. He did kill a kid. Niko's response was, but think about why he did it, his motivations, and he literally says, before he does it, the things I do for love. He's manipulated in a mental capacity, but he also has incest, which I don't really, I mean, I have a problem with it in real life, but the reasoning behind this, as far as his perspective, I don't blame him for it. Yeah, so just show some short responses to that. MP?
Short responses to what you just said?
No, I was describing what I was doing. That was my short response. Your turn to talk.
I have actually quite a bit, unfortunately. Sorry, guys. I just want to address Alizey first. I agree with most of everything you said. I do think that a new Lightbringer will be forged in this show. I just think that that's what the old one was, and it's showing. Lightbringer to me is just a metaphor of seeing the light sort of thing, you know, coming to a realization, and it's people working together to do something. So dragon, obsidian, iron, the north, making the metals and putting them together to kill. So it's just to me, a metaphor of coming together. You also mentioned the heart scene, and in that thing they said, we don't have time for that. John's response was, we don't have time for that, which I think means we're not going to see anybody get stabbed through a heart to forge a weapon or anything like that. So I agree with you there too. My opinion of the White Walkers themselves are, or at least the Army of the Dead, is when you see them, you're supposed to think of yourselves. They could be whatever ghosts haunt you or haunt the world and what you're in conflict with, and you have to come to terms with it. That's why the White Walkers are coming. That's the metaphor. Somebody mentioned that this is a full-fledged invasion. I think one of the points that George is making here is everything's invasive. from plants to animals to humans to whatever, no matter where you are, there's invasive species that people, even bugs, fight against other bugs coming into their territory. It's just a natural sort of thing. Doesn't mean it's good. We should be, as humans, you know, better than that, but I think that's sort of what he's going at. In regards to the actual battle, I find it very interesting that the choice to get the gold in first before the food was made, when food is arguably the more important of the two things to sustain an army or the people within the realm and things like that. But the gold had to get there first. There was a comment by Tarly, the dad, that if the head is attacked, the tail will not be able to defend it in time. I think that's a clear reference to what's going on up north. And we can't be sitting around here with Dany too long. We have to get back to where the head's about to be attacked. LaDonna, I agree with you. These books have to be taught in every university and dissected to no end. I mean, this is personally my new Bible. I love what you can grasp out of this, and it's people coming together. Personally, I believe is the ultimate realization of this. You also mentioned Jaws and the dragon and the same sort of quote. I think they're both kind of the same metaphor. If you interpret Jaws the way we interpret these books, you'll find sort of the same connotations. Other thing, obviously, I think somebody probably mentioned this before. Jamie says at the very beginning, the more you own, the more it weighs you down. He sinks. TeeBaby said this as well in the talk, so she has notes on that as well. I think it also applies to Dany and her dragons. These are things that are weighing her down, and it gets shot, and she comes back down to earth. So hopefully, pun intended this time, when I first said it, the pun wasn't intended, but hopefully this grounds her a little bit, and she sort of comes to this realization. And you, LaDonna, once again, you mentioned Jamie being born amidst salt and smoke. I think I'll agree with James, probably argue that a bit. But earlier when I was having difficulties with my computer, I was reading the comments, and salt and smoke are two things used to preserve flesh and meat. That's, you can salt meat and you can smoke meat to make it last a long time. Arguably, Azor Ahai, if you look at that sort of thing, cold preserves, ice or fire consumes is a line from the books. Maybe the Night's King was Azor Ahai, and the reason they left is because Azor Ahai led them away. And then it just becomes, and like you say, I think there's multiple Azor Ahais. It's something within all of us, and we've seen that. There's going to be many multiple rebirths and rebirths, or spiritual awakenings, if you will. Bronn and the gold, LaDonna, you said it best. Yeah, he had to make a choice. What's more important for him? It's the gold. I mean, sorry, it's the life. You fuck the gold, go save yourself, and he still tries to attack the dragon and save Jamie. Also, I do have a working theory of coins representing the children of the realm and being used as commodities, seeing them spread out along the thing when it's, I think, sort of plays into things. As far as the battle scenes go, my favorite part was Dany, and this goes for many arguments here, but Dany swooping over the lake, and you see the as above, so below sort of thing with two dragons. So that could definitely mean R plus L equals J. I'm giving you guys that. But there is two dragons there. So as above, so below, a dragon in the north, a dragon in the south. And I think I got everything there. There's probably a little bit more, but I think I managed to work it all off. So thank you.
Good stuff. Niko.
Okay. First of all, the scenes that I didn't like were actually in this fight scene, whatever, field of fire. It's my personal opinion. I'm not saying because fuck, I have to justify myself every time. The dragon's neck, the shape when he is like spewing fire, it's kind of for me. It's, I don't know, design wise, I didn't like it. Also, the scenes where there were people burnt alive running around, it was a bit claustrophobic. It looked like, I don't know, it was filmed in my apartment. It was not believable in my opinion. These are not the issues, just, I don't know, they probably are, spent money elsewhere or in the other scenes in this Field of Fire segment. Now, what Alizey said, Alizey, sorry. I always want to say Elsa. I don't know why. And I agree with her that Dany needs to learn that there are more important things than her and, like her rule or whatever. No matter how much she thinks, yes, she wants to be a ruler or whatever, the good ruler, but there are more important things than her. And I liked LaDonna's input. Yes, Cersei is all alone. She has no war council. She has nobody there. It's fucking, I'm really afraid for her because in a way, I kind of like Cersei. I mean, why not? I like all the characters except Robert Baratheon. Why? Yes, I agree with everybody that Bronn saved Jaime because who else cares about him in this way? It's not even, up for discussion in my mind. And then we get to the main point, Jaime. I agree with everything LaDonna said. Yes, I like Arya and I like Jaime. Everybody knows that. I like Arya on a personal level, like more like not equating myself, like I feel mostly connected to her in this way, but in a character way, I think Jaime is the most complex one. And in these scenes, we get the 3D Jaime, as I call it in my head, because you have, and this ties to what I was talking about before, about Sansa. I'm not going to drag her or anything. I'm just going to say that you don't change the personality. Like when your character grows, like what I mean by this is like in these scenes, you still see the cocky Jaime, saying, being a little bit of arrogant prick. But what changed in him was his perspective on things, which Brienne helped him in a way. And, like his losing his hand also helped him in a way to see world through different eyes. So this is like your character, you cannot expect, I don't know what people are expecting of Jaime, like to immediately hate Cersei. It cannot happen in a day. It has to be, built little by little. So what did I write here? And I don't understand people in the chat. I mean, I love you guys, but you have double standards. You keep justifying Jon and killing Ollie while you're saying like, oh, Jaime killed, pushed the guy, Bran from, what the fuck is that? Like you have to either or, there's no middle ground in this. Just because you hate Lannisters, because they were fucking portrayed from the beginning in the books. This is what Martin made you, choose sides from the beginning. Come on, guys. And in this show, in this season in particular, you get to see the other sides of Lannisters. When I say Lannisters, I mean their forces. I mean, this is just normal people who are actually forced to go to war because by chance they were born there, and then you belong by birth. You belong to a certain house, or you are obliged to serve a certain house. And this is how people go to war. And nobody's like, making political plans. I mean, I'm going to end this with, although America has been in war since forever and never stopped, you have a different perspective on war because you've never seen it like I did. And I'm not saying I'm a better person than you. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I have a different perspective. So keep that in mind. People who are fighting, normal soldiers, are just normal people like anybody else. In the Middle East, in Europe, in everywhere. It's the big guys, they're all trying to fight for Dany or whatever shit. But, like if you ask them, remember who said that? It was Illyrio Varys. People don't give a crap about who's ruling the kingdom. They want to eat and sleep and fuck, that's it. So I'm not going to bore you with these things, but like keep in mind, don't have double standards like you because you like Starks and Jon. So yeah, okay, he killed Ollie because he like Ollie deserved it or whatever. I don't know, this stupid shit. He was just a kid. and Bran is somebody, you know, like who you like. So, oh, Jaime is a piece of crap because he pushed him. No, it was more complex than that. So keep it in mind. Thank you. Oh yeah, and Jaime looked like he's a hero. And oh, one more thing. Sorry, I forgot. I loved how Dany seemed so small next to a dragon when she was trying to pull the spear out. So Jaime, he was such good at acting, like only with his face, you know, like without the just facial expressions, because for a moment I swear I saw like he had doubt, should I kill her or not? It was amazing. So good job for, you know, for the actors, and thank you guys for listening to me.
Fucking awesome. I have 2 tiny little notes and then I'm pretty much done. Let y'all go, see if there's anything else you want to fill out. MP, you mentioned the dragon tail. I just want to mention 2 things about, you meant it metaphorically, but mention 2 things. Number 1, it was awesome to watch that dragon smash, I guess, the carriage, because it burned the ballista, but then it like whipped around. And I wanted to add to that in D&D, that's how a dragon attacks. It has a bite attack and a tail attack. Anyway, Niko, you mentioned something that made me think about something pretty. You mentioned that Dany needs to know that there's things more important than her. I don't think that that's completely justifiable. It's way too broad, but that is literally what she said to Jon. She said, "Do you know how I survived all those things? Because I always believed in myself." But it's important to question yourself and to not be certain about anything. You always want to question not only your beliefs, but whether you're motivated properly and your morals. And Kierkegaard says you can't do that all the time, and you can't do it for everything, but we do our best. Somebody in the comments was like, we're all hypocrites. We are all hypocrites, and we're all immoral, and we all we have every fault possible. We just have them in lesser amounts than some other people. All right. Anybody want to add something, Lisa?
Yeah, I have a few points. I agree with you, Niko, about how there's kind of an America-centric perspective going on here, because, like, my family is Pakistani, and when I look at the dragons arriving, I think drones. And when I think drones, I don't see drones in the same way most Americans see drones, if I can make that point by skirting around it. And I also see a double standard in the way people are treating Jaime versus Jon. And also I want to just make the point that it was Dickon's first battle. How many other of those Lannister soldiers had never seen a battle before, and they just happened to be on the wrong side, and then they got roasted in the most horrific way for it? I mean, burning to death isn't pleasant, and it's less pleasant than just probably, well, okay, any type of death is terrible, but like a lot of those soldiers were probably just kids who signed up to fight for the bannermen of the Tarleys, and they just happened to be in the wrong side of like, they weren't there to fight Daenerys, they were there to fight Highgarden, which was hard enough for them in the first place. Dickon said it was bad for him because he knew those men. There was a lot of humanity that you could see from the ground, and Dany did not get that perspective because she was up in the air. If we had seen that entire battle aerial view, we would probably have very different opinions of it, because we wouldn't have seen that humanizing element. They really made a big point of showing it, and I think that point was that it's morally gray on all sides. And I think a lot of those soldiers were probably children as well. So to say that it's okay because they're Lannisters, it's kind of like, it's terrible for everyone. And I think that just makes it harder to pick a side. And I think they're doing that really well in this show. That, they probably know that people like Daenerys because she's strong and she's pretty and she's been built up from the very beginning as a protagonist. But I think she's being set up as more of an antagonist now than she has been in the past. With her being ruthless and domineering in a sense. And I definitely agree with Niko that nobody is right and nobody is wrong, but the war is terrible and that they're really showing that. And I think sometimes when Americans watch war movies, there's a gleeful element because they are removed from the reality of the harshness and the terribleness. I don't want to get into too personal things, but like I've seen the effects of terrorism firsthand, and it's awful. It is absolutely awful. And when I see Daenerys and her dragons, I see elements of that as well, and that's why I have such an emotional reaction to scenes like this. That's all I got.
And your perspective is greatly appreciated because other than Niko, you two are probably the only ones with that kind of experiences. I do have some disagreements with some of this. I don't like the American thing, because though that may be a blanket statement, it sounds like you're just saying all Americans. And though it's partly true, and
it's just something that I've noticed.
Yeah, no, I
since
agree.
I moved to America in particular, having lived in Europe and in Asia.
Right. But a lot of, and I agree with you, I'm not disagreeing with you, it doesn't apply to all Americans. There is a bigger thing about Americans using action movies and a lot of violence that ends up being glorified for the sake of itself. Revenge movies, like they're remaking, what was that trailer we watched with Bruce Willis recently? I forget the name of it. Anyway, the whole point of the movie is that something horrible happens to this guy and he goes on a rampage to kill all these bad people. Dirty Harry, that's a great example. That's not the one I'm talking about, but Dirty Harry is a great example. It's this,
Charles Bronson is the one you're talking
Charles Bronson. Well, that's the actor.
Yeah.
I can't remember the death.
Wait.
I can't remember, but I agree 100%. I think the issue with drones is both detachment, like there's not somebody there making the choice. They're so far removed that it seems much more easier to pull the trigger. That said, I don't really, that is coupled with that drones have been targeting the wrong people. That's really the ultimate issue. If it were only the enemy, I'm putting that in quotes, if it were only the guilty parties that were being killed, but that's why we have fair trials. Trial makes that easier. War, you don't have that opportunity. It's two people, it's not, but metaphorically, it's two people with a gun shooting at each other. Drones make it so that you're detached and you target the wrong people. It's easier to target the wrong people when you're not right up in there looking at their face. It's also guerrilla warfare makes that more difficult because you can't tell who's innocent and who's not. And Vietnam was a huge issue with that. There were Vietnamese slaughtered left and right because soldiers were presuming that they were guilty parties. And I totally empathize with the soldiers on both sides. I think most of us do as individuals. I mean, the book drives that point home, that it's the people, it's the common people who end up getting fucked over when lords fight. The broken man speech is a great example of the soldiers, and we get what the mountain does to the common folk. They steal food, they rape women. The stories are left and right, and we got soldiers today are guilty of the same stuff, probably in lesser amounts than it was the further you go back. But still, my overarching disagreement is, to me, it's no more fire. You want to cause this gets way too complicated. We maybe shouldn't be having this discussion. You want to cause the least amount of pain and do what is the most morally right as far as what side you're fighting for. We do not, it's impossible to be successful on both, and we are all very far from it. But asking for a fair fight, in my opinion, is not the right way to go about it. If a party thinks that they're the morally justified, if a country thinks they're the morally justified one in this battle, to me, to maintain honor, they're not obligated to fight a fair fight. which to meet them on the battle. That's what America did when it fought the British. It was honorable according to the British to line up and you lower your gun and you all fire at the same time. Well, Americans weren't doing that. And I mean, we weren't the first to do that, but the guerrilla warfare, what's the right side is always up for debate. But the idea of a fair fight being required to be honorable, I don't think is necessarily true in the dragon. But it's like nuclear warheads. Having them doesn't make you right. But if it's required, I hope we never use a nuclear warhead ever again. I don't know whether we're a country, fill in the blank, whatever country, is better off having them to make sure that they're protected in case somebody else fights them, or whether we're clearly better off without any nuclear warheads. But if you had a bad country with nuclear warheads and nobody else had them, I mean, there's no good answer to this, which is what the point of Dr. Strangelove is about. If the policy is we're just going to build more and more and more so the other side's afraid, all it takes is for one trigger slip and the whole world goes up in flames. All right.
Or one crazy guy with a nuclear code.
Right, exactly. What do they call him? President. So
Cheeto Mussolini, was that it?
Yeah, let's not get into politics stuff. Yeah, these are extremely difficult issues, and I probably went on for far too long. Does anybody want to add anything to that? Niko, MP? Niko.
I do. Okay,
Right.
Niko.
I saw Niko's hand first.
Should I go first or MP wants to?
Niko.
Okay. I would just like to add, of course, I understand why I don't hate anybody. And I hate everybody at the same time. I don't know. It's just like, oh, come on, people. But I don't have hatred in myself. When you say Americans, of course, people always refer to the States. And I actually last weekend had a really nice discussion with a friend of who actually, some of you guys know him, Alan, who actually put me to read the books in the first place, and with my husband. So three of us, we had all night long discussion about the culture thing. When you say America, most people think like, what is the culture of America? This is what you see in the movies, like, I don't know, Mickey Mouse, Disney shit, I don't know, Broadway, whatever. But America is much more than that. America is probably, I never seen it, never been to America, but it's a beautiful country. You cannot say that Disney movies are American culture. It's overall, but America is so many different countries together, right? So it's probably, I would like to see Georgia, for example. I think I want to experience that. It's different on a local level, right? On a global level, you get this whatever shit Hollywood and I don't know, stupid crap that nobody in Europe likes anyway. But it's stupid to say it's a whole country. This is what you get from like the union, but different countries have different culture. And I think you guys know you're in the Carolina, or I don't know, it's different than in Georgia. You have this, and I want to feel that. Why wouldn't I? I mean, it's probably great. And when people say they hate America, they hate the foreign policy. And this is what the bottom line. So, there's no hatred towards the people, because it would be the irony, the ultimate irony. So I love you guys. Thank you for listening to me, and I want to see what MP has to say.
Go for it, MP.
Just touching on a few things that you both said. The drone aspect, I agree with. You get that from Dany, and then she crashes to the ground, and she's in the thick of it for a bit. She's trying to pull the thing out, and that's one chance that she has to be killed by Jaime, right? So she was up above, detached from everything, just yelling Dracarys or whatever, and people are burning up and dying in flames. But then she comes down to the ground, and she can almost die. I hope that has an effect on her of what it's like to actually be in the middle of the war, as opposed to just, raining fire on people. The second thing I would say is I do think George has always played on this aspect with Dany. I've said it in Small Council before, where when we see her over in Essos, our general reader opinion and watcher opinion is hurry up and get back to Westeros, where you can do some gooder stuff, but we don't want her over in Essos with people with different names and people that we think that we don't relate to. yet it's a human level, and once you get rid of the weird names and everything like that, you realize the human element of things. And George was always, I think, he made her stay there overly long, so we got frustrated with her, and now she's back, and now we don't know what the fuck she's all about anymore. This isn't who we thought was going to arrive back in Westeros, so it kind of worries people. I actually kind of like that line of thinking with George and making us think about these sort of things and why Essos is different than Westeros, and just because different cultures and everything like that. That's all I had to say essentially on that. But yeah, I do think, Dany falling back down and being right in the battle and almost dying is going to have an impact on her, and I hope that it does.
Lovely stuff. Mom, did you want to add anything?
Well, I think everybody has certainly said wonderful things, and it's absolutely all of what you've said is what Martin wants us to think about. Yeah. But it really doesn't matter, does it? It really is about, we've got a huge fucking threat coming. That's the end game. We've got a big threat coming. And by God, humanity better suck up and get rid of their egos and their power struggles and pull together. And, you know, it's almost like in a family. You know, I've raised 3 kids, and they're super different. And I've had to dance it between all of y'all. You will never get it, James, until you raise your own family. But you have to kind of dance it between all of them and be very diplomatic to get people to pull together. And on a global scale, it's almost impossible. And I'm still going to say, I've lived a long time. I've waited for my world to do this, and they still are squabbling. You always get a Joffrey or a Kim Jong-un or whatever. You always get somebody who's a fucking idiot wild card. But hopefully at the end of this, they're going to pull together. And all right, I'm going to now go to the microcosm. Gendry's fucking coming back soon. He's coming back next episode, in my opinion. Next episode is called Eastwatch, and that means that the Hound and all of our buddies in the Brotherhood are going up there. That's not a spoiler. That's just the name of the episode. So Jon's going to go up there and try to bring a goddamn White or White Walker back. And the world is going to explode because Snarks and Grumpkins are real. And when that happens, who's going to believe it? Even if they're confronted with it. Remember Janos Slynt, Jon said, there's a fucking giant and mastodons down there. And he goes, I don't see anything. Who's going to believe it? Are they still going to keep squabbling? Yeah, they are, because human beings are nasty little animals.
We are. Alizey, do you want to have anything to that?
I know this, like, the last part of the discussion has gotten a little heated, but I just want to say that it's a beautiful thing that we can see parallels to our own world in this fantasy world. And I think that really, more so than the books, the show and the show writers I think they're intentionally trying to draw parallels to make us think about these things. So I think it's important to discuss this stuff because it is the things that happen in the real world that will affect how we feel about it in a fantasy world. And more than anything else, the world of Westeros is based in historical elements that have happened, like the Red Wedding. There was something just like that happened in Scotland. It wasn't called the Red Wedding, but that was an event that happened. And I think that the terrible things that happen in the world have a parallel to the terrible things we see in fantasy, and that we just need to recognize that it is morally ambiguous, and we can't always root for our favorite and have them do the good things. I think it's important to recognize that, all the characters in this show are flawed. All of them do terrible things. And just because you root for someone in one season doesn't mean that you will always root for them. So I think it's important to recognize that those things can shift because people change, and that's why I'm the way I see Jaime, to go back to that, is that he needed to do something absolutely awful right at the beginning of the series in order to have character progression later on. And I think he's established himself more of a decent man, despite his connection with Cersei, who is, I think we can all agree that she is not a good person. I think there's no black and white here, and everybody is gray. And that's how the world is. And the more we see that in fantasy worlds, the more we can recognize it in the real world.
100% agreed. And every single one of us.
Can I add one thing, and I'm gonna nope the fuck out. I think it was important in this battle scene that nobody that we loved really died. I think now we're about to see a whole lot of people that we really love and care about die. This is the downslide into the bittersweet ending. And I think next week we're going to see some people we love die.
I think that's a great point, and I 100% agree. This battle, as beautiful and terrifying and horrible as it was, none of the characters, none of the people we were close to seemed to die in it. And that is not Game of Thrones. So I think that the point is to give the viewer a false sense of security before you destroy them, so that when you are finally at the end, the viewer, the reader, the audience has no idea who's going to survive, knows that everybody is up for being taken. When you think about it, Rickon was literally created solely so that he could be ripped from our hearts later. With the exception of the books being done differently, the only reason Rickon exists is to rip our heart out later. You can say that about everything. You mentioned that about Jaime. Jaime throws Bran out so that later he can build himself up. But that's from the meta perspective. Within the books, he threw Bran out a fucking window. And he did that for reasons. And I don't mean that in an ironic way. He had his justifications within his mind for why he did that. All right, I don't want to keep this going. We need to wrap this up. I did want to close in response to you. What you said before you said what you said, I wrote this down and I've said it a million times. I just want to repeat it to support what you said. If we can't discuss the moral questions that these fantasy books bring up, who can? Ever. This is important stuff we're talking about, and that is why these books are important. All right.
Can I add one thing, James, before we go? Sorry.
Yeah. Yes, MP. Sorry, did I skip you?
Just Alizey mentioned it. Fun fact, I'm actually related to the people of the Glencoe massacre. That's half of the inspiration for the Red Wedding. And to this day, or not this day, but years ago, my grandmother, when I was getting sent to hang out with some Campbells, it's Campbell's versus McDonald's, she said, "Why are you letting him go off with those Campbells?" So, sins of the father sort of thing. People hold on to things. I love Campbell's, by the way. I've been in love with many different Campbells, but yeah, it's just a fun fact that I wanted to add there since you brought it up. Is the Glencoe massacre, if anybody wants to look it up. Thank you.
I just want to say I'm a Buchanan. Hi. Scottish. Woo!
Nice. Awesome. Awesome.
I love all of y'all. I love you viewers, and I love you, Niko, and I love you, Maester Payne. I love you, LaDonna. I love you too, TeeBaby and Tony and Charlie. Sorry I couldn't make it, T and Tony. We love you. Thank you, Alicia Kingston, and thank you, Renee M. of House Targaryen. Your help is greatly appreciated. Thank you to all of you in the comments. and all of you watching after the live viewer. Comment below. We love the discussion.
Happy birthday, James.
Yeah.
Happy birthday, James.
My birthday coming soon, by the way. I'm gonna be 25.
Sure.
Shut up.
Love y'all.
Bye, everybody.
Ciao.
Bye.